My name is Jerome. I am 69 years old and I have a secret my son knows nothing about. I make $200,000 a month. When he invited me to meet his wealthy future family, I purposely wore my old faded suit to see their true colors. Before I continue, tell me where you are watching from in the comments and hit like if you have ever been underestimated. The very moment I stepped toward the heavy glass front doors of Ciel, the tall manager blocked my path with a look of pure disgust. "Excuse me, sir." The manager sneered, his eyes raking over my scuffed leather shoes and the frayed edges of my jacket. "This is an exclusive establishment. We enforce a strict dress code. I am afraid you cannot enter looking like a vagrant." I stood tall, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "I have a reservation under the name Kensington. I am here to meet my son, Kendrick." The manager's laughter was a dry, dismissive sound. "That is highly unlikely. The Kensingtons are inside, but they certainly are not waiting for someone of your social standing. Please leave before I call security." Just then, Kendrick emerged from the dining room, my brilliant boy looking sharp in a tailored Italian suit. I expected him to step forward to put this arrogant manager in his place and proudly declare that I was his father. Instead, his face drained of color. He did not look at the manager with righteous anger. He looked at me with sheer absolute panic. "Dad, what are you wearing?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. He did not defend my honor or demand respect. His grip was tight, almost painful, as he forcefully pulled me away from the entrance and into a dimly lit corner of the lobby, hiding me like a shameful secret. The disappointment struck me harder than any physical blow. My own son, a black man who knew exactly where we came from, was embarrassed by my presence. He kept glancing nervously toward the dining room, terrified that his precious new family might catch a glimpse of the man who gave him life. He shoved his hands into his pockets, sweating profusely as he scrambled to find a truly pathetic solution to a problem that never should have existed in the first place here today. Looking at his immaculate jacket, I vividly remembered the freezing winter 20 years ago. After his mother passed away, I worked double shifts hauling heavy freight across state lines. I ate nothing but cheap canned beans for an entire month just to afford his very first tailored suit for his high school graduation. I wanted my boy to feel like a king, to know he was capable of conquering this world. I sacrificed my own comfort so he could shine brightly. Yet here he was treating me like dirt on the bottom of his expensive new Italian shoes. Kendrick hastily pulled out his leather wallet and extracted a crisp $100 bill. He practically ran back to the arrogant manager and shoved the money directly into his palm, whispering frantically. The manager smirked, making the cash vanish into his vest pocket before nodding slowly. "Fine," the manager declared loudly enough for passing guests to hear. "He can proceed to the private dining area, but please ensure he stays completely out of sight." Kendrick exhaled a heavy breath of relief and gestured for me to follow him quickly. I walked past the host stand, maintaining my composure while observing my son's trembling shoulders. He thought he had successfully handled an embarrassing situation by throwing a little bit of cash at it. He truly believed he was the one protecting me from public humiliation. I followed him into the lavishly decorated private room, quietly allowing the charade to continue, knowing full well that tonight would permanently change everything between us forever, starting right now. Inside the private dining room, Richard and Victoria Kensington were already seated at a grand mahogany table. Madeline, my son's stunningly beautiful but incredibly shallow fiancée, sat beside them, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than most people's homes. When I approached, her piercing blue eyes slowly dragged up and down my faded suit, lingering on my worn-out shoes. She extended a perfectly manicured hand with deep reluctance. "Nice to meet you," she murmured softly and coldly. The very second I released her grip, she immediately grabbed a sanitizing wet wipe and thoroughly scrubbed her fingers. Richard Kensington leaned back in his plush velvet chair, swirling a glass of incredibly rare vintage wine. He wore a patronizing smirk that was designed to make me feel profoundly small. "So, Jerome," he began, his tone dripping with sheer condescension, "Kendrick tells me you are living on a fixed pension these days. That must be quite the challenging adjustment for someone of your demographic. We are currently finalizing a monumental $100 million commercial development downtown. I'm sure you have seen the massive cranes. It's a complex web of mezzanine debt, aggressive equity leveraging, and diverse tax increment financing structures. I doubt a man in your simple position could even begin to comprehend the immense macroeconomic pressures we deal with on a daily basis." I kept my expression neutral, taking a slow sip of my iced water. "Really," I replied mildly. "That sounds like a lot of heavy borrowing." Richard chuckled loudly, exchanging an amused glance with his haughty wife, Victoria. Borrowing, he echoed, shaking his head in mock pity. Oh, Jerome, it is called strategic capital optimization. It is how the elite class builds generational wealth, while the working class simply struggles to pay their monthly utility bills. Kendrick shifted uncomfortably in his seat, staring down at his empty plate rather than defending my basic human dignity. He actually seemed entirely mesmerized by Richard's boastful vocabulary, nodding along like an obedient lapdog eager to please his wealthy future father. Richard continued talking incessantly about asset liquidation ratios and massive corporate equity, deliberately utilizing advanced terminology intended to thoroughly humiliate me in front of everyone. He wanted to unequivocally establish the absolute power dynamic, proving that I was absolutely nothing but an insignificant speck of dust in their glamorous, high-class, opulent world today. What Richard did not know was that I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. I operate entirely in the shadows, controlling billions in real estate acquisitions across the nation. That massive downtown project he was so fiercely bragging about relies on land I currently own through a holding company. I generate more income in a single week than his entire struggling corporation produces in a fiscal year. But I chose to keep my wealth hidden from Kendrick to ensure he built his own character, without ever relying on my own immense personal fortune. Instead of exposing my true identity, I simply maintained my calm demeanor and offered a mild, resigned smile. "It is wonderful that you are doing so well, Richard," I said softly, playing the role of the defeated old man perfectly. When the waiter arrived with the gold-embossed menus, Victoria immediately intervened before I could even glance at the pages. "Oh, let me order for you, Jerome," she insisted in a sickeningly sweet voice. "Your older stomach probably cannot handle the rich, expensive imported delicacies we enjoy. I will order you the basic grilled chicken breast. It is the cheapest item here, so you will not feel completely out of place." Madeline giggled behind her manicured hand while Kendrick merely stared at his water glass, refusing to meet my eyes. I sat there in total silence, watching them gloat in their false superiority. The spring inside me was compressing tighter and tighter, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming for them very soon. The cheap chicken arrived, but the real main course was served right after. Victoria reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She tossed them onto the center of the table with a heavy thud. The thick manila folder bore the gold-stamped crest of the Kensington family. It was a prenuptial agreement. She slid it directly toward my son. Her eyes locked onto him with a predator's gaze. It was not a request. It was an absolute command masked as a standard wealthy family formality. The air grew incredibly tense. "We need to finalize the practicalities," Kendrick, Victoria stated, tapping her long fingernail against the top page. "In our world, love is beautiful, but asset protection is absolutely mandatory. This document ensures that whatever belongs to the Kensington estate remains solely within the Kensington bloodline." Madeline smirked, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. "It is just standard procedure, honey," she purred, tracing his arm. "You do not mind proving that you are marrying me for love and not for my inheritance, right?" I watched Kendrick swallow hard. He picked up the document and began to read. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the pages. I could see the exact moment he realized the severity of the terms. If they divorced, he would leave with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no property rights, not even a single share of the assets he would inevitably help them build during their marriage. It was a total surrender of his financial independence. Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Do we have a problem, Kendrick?" he asked, his voice dripping with barely concealed threat. "Because if my daughter is going to marry a man from your background, we demand absolute legal security. You bring no capital to this union, therefore you claim no capital." Kendrick looked like a cornered animal. He looked at Madeline pleadingly, but she merely offered a cold, expectant smile. He was completely stripped of his dignity in front of the very people who were supposed to become his family. Yet he did not fight back. He did not defend his own worth. He simply lowered his head completely, accepting his role as a second-class citizen in their opulent world. It was a deeply humiliating display of pure submission that turned my stomach entirely sour. Watching him cower brought back a flood of painful memories. I remembered the grueling nights I spent driving 18-wheelers across frozen highways, gripping the steering wheel until my own hands bled. I sacrificed my youth and my health surviving on coffee and sheer willpower. Every single dollar I earned went straight into his college fund so he could study architecture at a prestigious university. I built a foundation of iron and sweat so my son would never have to bow his head to anyone. Now he was throwing it all away for a fake golden crown. Kendrick slowly reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a silver pen. He did not read the rest of the pages. He did not ask for a lawyer to review the predatory clauses. He just signed his name on the dotted line, handing over his future with a defeated sigh. "Excellent choice," Richard said, snatching the folder away with a triumphant grin. Madeline kissed Kendrick's cheek, a hollow reward for his total obedience. Underneath the mahogany table, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. I grabbed my linen napkin and crushed it in my grip, twisting the fabric until my fingers ached. The urge to flip the table and drag my son out of that toxic room was overwhelming, but I forced my muscles to relax. I maintained a perfectly calm and clueless expression on my face. I knew exactly what I had to do. Let them think they had won this round because the real game was only just beginning. Before the ink was even dry on the prenuptial agreement, Richard reached into his briefcase and produced a second document. This one was even thicker. "Since you are officially joining the family, it is time we secure your professional future as well," Richard announced, loudly sliding the new contract toward Kendrick. "This is an exclusive lifetime employment agreement with Kensington Group. You will work directly under me as our lead architect. You will design our upcoming flagship properties. Sign it now and your career is permanently set." It was not an offer, but another heavy trap. I could not stay silent any longer. I leaned forward and politely pointed at a specific paragraph on the visible page. "Excuse me, Richard," I said, keeping my tone respectful but firm. "I may not know much about big business, but that non-compete clause seems incredibly restrictive. It says Kendrick waives the rights to his own intellectual property and cannot work for any other firm, even if he leaves Kensington Group. That essentially makes him your indentured servant." The entire table froze. Victoria dropped her fork with a loud clatter. Madeline glared at me as if I had just tracked mud onto a white rug. Richard let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the private room walls. "An indentured servant," he mocked, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Oh, Jerome, your ignorance is truly amusing. That is standard corporate retention strategy. A man living on a modest state pension should not try to teach a billionaire how to structure a business deal. Stick to your simple life and let the adults handle the real money." I looked at Kendrick, expecting him to finally see the danger. Instead, my son slammed his hands on the table and glared at me with pure fury. "Shut up, Dad!" he yelled, his voice cracking with humiliation and rage. "Just shut up! What do you know about macroeconomics or corporate architecture? You have never built anything important in your entire life. You are embarrassing me. Do not ruin the biggest opportunity I have ever had." He grabbed the pen and frantically signed the employment contract, pushing it back to Richard like a desperate beggar offering a tribute. He had just willingly sold his mind, his talent, and his entire future for absolutely nothing. What Richard desperately hid was that Kensington Group was fundamentally rotting from the inside out. I knew their stock prices were plummeting and their designs were painfully outdated. Kendrick's architectural genius was the singular asset that could truly save their failing empire. His innovative, eco-friendly designs were highly coveted in the industry. The Kensingtons did not want a son-in-law. They wanted a brilliant workhorse they could chain to their sinking ship and exploit for free. They were using my son's desperate need for upper-class validation to steal his billion-dollar potential. I slowly let go of my silver fork and knife, placing them neatly on the edge of my porcelain plate. The metallic clink sounded incredibly loud in the sudden silence of the room. I looked at Kendrick, who was breathing heavily, his face flushed with misdirected anger. I looked at Madeline, who was smiling smugly at her new property. I looked at Richard and Victoria, who were already celebrating their brilliant manipulation. My shoulders relaxed and my posture straightened. The facade of the frail, submissive father entirely melted away. My eyes shifted from the warm gaze of a disappointed parent to the cold, calculating stare of an apex predator. I no longer saw my son in that chair. I saw a casualty of war. And I no longer saw in-laws across the table. I saw my next prey. I wiped my mouth with my napkin and offered a chillingly polite smile. "Of course, Kendrick," I whispered softly. "I will not say another word." The stifling dinner finally concluded, and we all stepped out into the cool, dark night air of the restaurant parking lot. The valet brought around my rusted Chevrolet, parked aggressively next to Richard Kensington's pristine Bentley. Before I could even reach for my door handle, Richard stepped abruptly into my personal space, blocking my path completely. He reached into his tailored breast pocket and aggressively shoved a folded piece of paper directly against my chest. It fluttered to the asphalt landing near my scuffed shoes. It was a certified bank check made out for exactly $10,000. "Listen to me very carefully, Jerome," Richard sneered, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper so the valet could not hear. "You are simply not coming to the wedding. The ceremony is being held at the elite country club of the Hamptons, and your presence is strictly forbidden. We have prominent investors, wealthy socialites, and international politicians attending. My family cannot afford the reputational damage of having a poor black man from the wrong side of the tracks standing in the family photos. You do not fit our aesthetic, and you certainly do not fit our pedigree. Consider this money a generous buyout for your permanent absence." Madeline stepped up beside her father, wrapping a designer shawl around her shoulders and wrinkling her nose as she looked at my vehicle. "It is nothing personal, Jerome," she added in a tone that was entirely personal. "We just want Kendrick to have the perfect day. Your presence would only confuse our guests, and frankly it would humiliate Kendrick. He truly belongs to our world now. He is stepping into a life of high society country clubs and massive corporate mergers. You represent a past he is desperately trying to erase. Take the money and go back to your little brick house. Pay off whatever meager debts you have and enjoy a quiet, simple life away from us." Victoria scoffed from the back seat of the Bentley, rolling down her tinted window to deliver her own strike. "Do not be greedy, old man. $10,000 is more than you probably made in a decade of hauling trash. Take the handout and stay away from my daughter and my family. You will not ruin our pristine lineage with your pathetic lower-class misery. Just disappear entirely from our lives right now." The chilling cruelty of their words instantly transported me back 40 years. I remembered standing in the lobby of a similar country club begging a wealthy white developer for a simple construction contract. They had mocked my worn clothes, insulted my heritage, and thrown me out into the freezing rain. That horrific night taught me that in this country, class boundaries are built with bricks of prejudice and mortared with sheer absolute ruthlessness. I promised myself I would successfully conquer their world to protect my future bloodline from ever experiencing that exact same suffocating and helpless humiliation again. I slowly turned my head away from the Kensingtons and looked directly at Kendrick. He was standing merely 10 feet away, witnessing every single vile insult hurled at his father. I waited for him to speak. I waited for the boy I raised to step forward, reject their filthy money, and defend his family name. Instead, Kendrick stiffened his posture and deliberately turned his face away, staring intently at a decorative lamppost across the street. He chose to act as if he saw absolutely nothing. He was completely abandoning me to secure his coveted position in their golden cage. The deafening silence from my son was louder than all of Richard's arrogant screaming. It was the ultimate betrayal. He was choosing his abusers over the man who gave him everything. My heart shattered but quickly calcified, turning into something cold and entirely devoid of mercy. The paternal warmth vanished completely, leaving only the ruthless, calculating instincts of a billionaire predator ready to strike right now. I lowered my tired gaze to the cold pavement and slowly bent down. My aged joints popped in the quiet night as I reached out and picked up the $10,000 check from the dirty ground. I stood back up, brushing off the asphalt dust from the pristine paper. I looked at Richard Kensington and offered him a broad, deeply submissive, and grateful smile. "You are absolutely right, Richard," I said, maintaining a perfectly defeated tone. "I do not belong in your glamorous world. I will gladly take this generous money and disappear from the wedding forever." Richard let out a booming, triumphant laugh that echoed across the empty parking lot. "I knew you would see reason, Jerome," he mocked, patting my shoulder with aggressive, patronizing force. "Everyone has a price, and yours is predictably cheap. Go buy yourself a nice television and watch the world pass you by." Madeline clapped her hands together in sheer delight, leaning against the expensive car door. "Oh, thank God," she sighed loudly. "I was so worried we would have to explain your dreadful outfits to the catering staff. This makes everything so much easier. You really are doing us a huge favor by staying hidden in your proper place." Victoria rolled her window up slightly, but not before delivering her final venomous remark. "Spend the money wisely, old man," she sneered. "It is the closest you will ever get to real Kensington wealth. Do not attempt to contact my daughter or my new son-in-law again. We are their family now. You are officially obsolete." Richard tipped the valet an obscene amount of cash, sliding into the driver's seat of his luxury vehicle. Kendrick wordlessly climbed into the back seat, still refusing to make eye contact with me. They slammed the heavy doors shut firmly, sealing themselves inside their bubble of perceived superiority. The Bentley roared to life, its powerful engine mocking my battered Chevrolet. They genuinely believed they had just successfully bought off a pathetic nuisance for pennies on the dollar. They felt entirely invincible and completely untouchable atop their high-class pedestal. They laughed gleefully inside the cabin, pointing at my old car, as they slowly reversed out of the parking space, reveling in their absolute victory and leaving me standing behind in a cloud of thick, dark exhaust fumes and total, utter disrespect. Watching them drive away, I felt a deeply dangerous calmness wash over me. 20 years ago, a neighborhood bully had cornered a young Kendrick, shoving him to the ground and hurling racial slurs at him. I did not negotiate or smile that day. I found that man and broke his arm in 2 different places, ensuring he never dared to look at my son ever again. I was always fiercely protective, violently so, but today I chose a completely different weapon. A deadly silence is far more destructive than any physical violence could ever truly hope to be. I stood still in the parking lot until the red taillights of their Bentley vanished completely into the city traffic. I looked down at the $10,000 check in my hand, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the frayed pocket of my old suit jacket. It was a miserable down payment on their own rapid destruction. I walked over to my Chevrolet, unlocked the heavy door, and slid into the worn driver's seat. I did not start the engine immediately. Instead, I reached into my secure inner pocket and pulled out my encrypted satellite phone. The screen illuminated the dark cabin with a harsh white glow. I dialed a private offshore number that only one other person possessed. Jonathan answered on the very first ring, his voice crisp and highly professional. "Good evening, sir." "How was the dinner?" Jonathan asked. I stared out the windshield into the dark, empty night. "Begin the hunt," I commanded coldly. "Net the Kensingtons immediately without any mercy." I drove my battered Chevrolet back to my modest brick house situated on a quiet suburban street. I bypassed the main living area and unlocked the heavy steel door leading down to the basement. The damp air instantly vanished, replaced by the cool hum of state-of-the-art servers and climate control systems. I stepped into my true domain. The dark room was illuminated by a massive semicircular array of glowing financial monitors displaying real-time global market data. I sat in the center leather chair and pressed a single button connecting a heavily encrypted video call. The face of Jonathan Pierce, my lead attorney and chief financial operator, appeared on the central screen. He looked sharp and fully awake despite the late hour. "Good evening, sir," Jonathan said, adjusting his glasses. "I have executed the deep dive forensic accounting on the Kensington Group just as you requested. The results are frankly astonishing. Richard Kensington has been putting on a masterful theatrical performance for the public, but his empire is entirely hollow." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass desk. "Give me the exact numbers, Jonathan," I instructed coldly. Jonathan pulled up a dense spreadsheet mirroring it directly onto my secondary monitor. "They are currently drowning in a massive sea of toxic corporate debt," Jonathan explained, pointing to the red figures cascading down the screen. "Over the past 5 years, they have aggressively over-leveraged their core commercial assets to fund an unsustainable lifestyle and cover a string of catastrophic developmental failures. The total outstanding debt across multiple high-interest lenders is precisely $400 million. They are bleeding cash daily trying to service the interest payments. Their liquidity is completely gone." I stared at the horrifying financial data, realizing just how desperate Richard truly was tonight. "So they are effectively bankrupt," I stated. "Not officially yet, but they are standing right on the very edge of the cliff," Jonathan confirmed. "If their creditors demand full payment or if they miss their next quarterly filing deadline, the entire Kensington Group will instantly face aggressive foreclosure and total liquidation. They have zero capital left to maneuver. They are desperately treading water, hiding their impending financial doom behind expensive suits and lavish country club events." I digested the information slowly. My son was marrying into a massive financial sinkhole masquerading as a golden palace. This perfectly illustrated the sickening hypocrisy of the East Coast wealthy elite families. I had spent decades observing these arrogant aristocrats from the unseen shadows, thoroughly analyzing their predictable behavioral patterns. They proudly paraded their designer labels, hosted extravagant charity galas, and openly mocked the hardworking classes while secretly drowning in astronomical debt. Their entire existence was built on an incredibly fragile foundation of endless credit and inherited prestige that was rapidly decaying. They desperately used prestigious marriages to inject necessary talent into their dying bloodlines, keeping their fake, glamorous illusions barely alive for another single day. Now, a sudden chilling realization washed over me as I connected the dots. "Jonathan," I said sharply, my voice echoing in the quiet basement, "bring up the exact clauses of the lifelong employment contract Richard forced my son to sign at the restaurant earlier tonight. I need to see the liability sections." Jonathan typed rapidly, and the document appeared on screen, highlighting a dense paragraph buried deep within the legal jargon. My blood instantly turned to ice. According to this clause, Kendrick was not just becoming their lead architect. They had subtly designated him as the primary legal signatory for all of their future structural and environmental liabilities. He was taking on full legal responsibility for their entire corporate development portfolio. If the Kensington Group finally collapsed under the massive weight of their own crippling $400 million debt, Richard and Victoria would safely walk away clean. They were deliberately setting up my completely oblivious son to be their ultimate legal scapegoat facing federal prison. To make matters incredibly worse, they are banking their entire survival on a single final gamble. Jonathan continued bringing up a three-dimensional architectural rendering onto the main screen. This is the Vanguard project. It is a highly ambitious, multi-use commercial and residential complex projected to completely revitalize the downtown district. Richard has been desperately pitching this concept to global investors, promising massive, unparalleled returns. It is the only shiny, attractive bait keeping their angry creditors from immediately foreclosing on their remaining assets. If Vanguard successfully launches, they survive. If it fails, they are ruined completely forever. I stared at the beautiful holographic design rotating slowly on the screen, recognizing my son's distinct aesthetic immediately. Kendrick had poured his brilliant soul into that blueprint, but there is a massive, fatal flaw in their grand scheme. Is there not? "Jonathan?" I asked, a cold smirk forming on my lips. Jonathan returned my smile with a predatory grin of his own. "Precisely, sir," he agreed, typing another quick command. "The entire Vanguard project depends completely on acquiring a specific 70-acre parcel of prime downtown real estate. Richard has been telling his investors that Kensington Group has already secured the exclusive purchasing rights to this land. He is utilizing this fabricated assurance to leverage more desperate funding. However, I have personally checked the current municipal registry. That specific parcel was quietly purchased 3 months ago by a highly classified entity." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. "And who exactly owns that critical piece of land?" "Now, Jonathan," I asked, though I already knew the delightful answer.
"Perfectly well."
"The title deed officially belongs to Apex Holdings, sir." Jonathan replied, his tone ringing with absolute triumph. "You own the exact ground they desperately need to build their salvation upon. They cannot lay a single brick without your explicit legal permission. Richard is unknowingly trying to build his ultimate saving grace on a foundation that belongs entirely to the very man he just humiliated in a restaurant parking lot." I let out a low, resonant laugh that filled the quiet basement. The irony was absolutely exquisite. They believed they held all the power in the world over me. Yet, they were blindly walking straight into a steel trap that I had set in motion months ago, waiting patiently for the perfect moment. Today, I had spent the last 2 decades meticulously building an invisible empire from the ground up, through a complex network of shell companies and incredibly discreet investments. My absolute authority over American real estate expanded silently, stretching from the busy streets of New York to the sunny shores of California. No major commercial development happened in this city without passing through my invisible fingers. First, Richard proudly paraded his decaying wealth in broad daylight while I completely controlled the unseen tectonic plates of the entire market, operating comfortably within the very deepest shadows of the financial world today. I leaned closer to the camera, my expression hardening into stone. "Jonathan, it is time to deploy the main offensive," I declared, my voice vibrating with an icy, lethal authority. "I want you to immediately mobilize our liquid assets. Contact every single bank and private lender holding the Kensington Group debt portfolio right now. use hard, untraceable cash to buy up all $400 million of their outstanding liabilities. Offer the banks a premium if you must, but acquire it all before sunrise. I want to consolidate their entire financial burden under Apex Holdings. By the time Richard Kensington wakes up, tomorrow morning I want to be the sole and direct creditor holding the absolute power over his pathetic existence. He tried to buy my absence with a miserable $10,000 tonight. I am going to successfully buy his entire life by tomorrow morning. Execute the specific order. Jonathan, strip them completely bare. Let the hunt officially begin right now without fail today. The next morning, the heavy silence of my modest brick house was shattered by loud, aggressive knocking. Before I could even reach the doorknob, the front door swung violently open. Madeline barged right into my living room uninvited. She immediately pinched her perfectly sculpted nose with two manicured fingers, her face contorting in an expression of absolute disgust. She audibly gasped, waving her other hand in front of her face as if the very air inside my home was toxic. "It smells like cheap mold and desperate poverty in here," she complained loudly, her voice dripping with sheer revulsion. I stood silently by the hallway, crossing my arms and watching her pace around my small living room like a wealthy inspector evaluating a condemned property. "What exactly are you doing here, Madeline?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any welcoming warmth. She ignored my question completely and dug into her oversized designer handbag. She pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents and slammed them aggressively onto my worn wooden coffee table. "You are going to sign these property transfer papers today, Jerome," she commanded with arrogant, absolute authority. "Kendrick told me you own this pathetic little brick shack outright. We have officially decided that you are going to sell it immediately. The proceeds will go directly into my personal wedding account." I stared down at the documents and then back up at her face. "You want me to sell my only home to fund your luxury wedding?" I asked, pretending to be genuinely shocked by her sheer audacity. "Exactly," she snapped, rolling her eyes dramatically as if explaining a basic concept to a slow toddler. "My custom designer bridal gown alone costs $50,000. The exotic floral arrangements and the imported caviar will be another $30,000. Kendrick is already maximizing all of his credit cards to pay for the country club venue, and my parents are strictly saving their liquid cash for the Vanguard project. You are his father. It is your absolute ultimate duty to contribute to my perfect day. You can easily rent a tiny room in some cheap retirement facility. You do not need a whole house to yourself at your age anyway. Sign the papers right now so I can list this absolute garbage dump on the market by noon." Looking at her towering arrogance, I had to suppress a highly amused chuckle. She stood there fiercely demanding the deed to my simple brick house, utterly convinced she was robbing a poor, helpless old man. The deep irony was truly staggering. Madeline had absolutely no clue that I owned not just this humble house, but the deed to this entire bustling neighborhood. Every commercial building, every apartment complex, and every single retail storefront on this long, vibrant street belonged exclusively to my hidden real estate portfolio, generating millions in passive revenue every single month quietly and consistently. I slowly approached the coffee table and picked up the thick stack of transfer documents. Madeline smiled smugly, crossing her arms, assuming I was completely broken and ready to submit to her outrageous demands. Instead of grabbing a pen, I gripped the top of the pages with both hands. I stared directly into her cold blue eyes and sharply ripped the entire legal packet completely in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed loudly in the quiet room. I dropped the shredded pieces onto the floor right at her expensive heels. "My answer is absolutely no," I stated with a cold, razor-sharp finality that froze the arrogant smirk right off her face. "I will not give you a single dime for your dress or your wedding. Now get out of my house before I call the authorities and have you removed for trespassing." It was my very first direct refusal, and the shock on her face was absolutely priceless to witness today. Madeline stood completely paralyzed for a fraction of a second, her brain struggling to process my absolute defiance. Then her shock instantly morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. Her face turned a violent shade of red and she let out a piercing, animalistic shriek. She wildly swung her arm and violently swiped her designer handbag across my antique side table. The heavy bag slammed directly into my framed family photograph, knocking it onto the hardwood floor. The glass shattered into dozens of jagged, sharp pieces, sending fragments flying violently across the entire living room floor right now. You miserable, useless old man, she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure venom and extreme hostility. How dare you ever speak to me that way? You are absolutely nothing but a pathetic piece of trash living off my fiancé's generous charity. I maintained my rigid ground, completely unmoved by her highly aggressive and childish tantrum. Kendrick does not give me any charity, I replied coldly. And you are just a greedy parasite, trying to drain him completely dry. Madeline stepped closer, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. You are going to deeply regret this massive mistake, Jerome, she threatened, her eyes wide with a psychotic, uncontrollable fury. You actually think you can just tell me no. I control Kendrick completely. I tell him what to wear, who to speak to, and exactly how to spend his hard-earned money. He worships the very ground I walk on. If you do not cough up the cash for my wedding dress by tomorrow morning, I swear to you I will thoroughly poison his mind against you forever. I will easily convince him that you brutally insulted me, physically abused me, and aggressively tried to sabotage our bright future together. I will make absolutely sure he cuts you out of his life completely. You will never attend our luxury wedding. You will never see your future grandchildren. You will die entirely alone in this moldy, disgusting brick shack, and Kendrick will not even bother to show up at your miserable, pathetic funeral. Give me the money right now, or I will permanently erase you from your own son's life starting today. Do you understand me, you worthless old fool? I stood silently, letting her completely expose her truly wicked soul. Her vile threat perfectly highlighted the dark, toxic psychological manipulation she had utilized to lead my son by the nose all these years. Madeline possessed a terrifying talent for twisting reality, playing the fragile victim, while simultaneously operating as a ruthless dictator. She isolated Kendrick from his old friends, dictated his professional choices, and slowly eroded his strong, independent spirit until he became her eager, compliant servant. He mistook her controlling abuse for passionate love, completely blind to the thick, heavy chains she had securely wrapped around his entire existence since they first met. I did not flinch or react to her screaming. I simply stared at her with a blank, emotionless expression. You have made your position incredibly clear, Madeline, I said evenly, pointing a steady finger toward the front door. Now leave my property. She sneered, grabbing her designer bag and stomping her luxury heels over the shattered glass of my family portrait. You just signed your own death warrant, old man, she spat before storming out and aggressively slamming the heavy front door behind her. I heard the tires of her sports car screech as she sped away from the curb. Once the house fell silent again, I casually reached underneath the wooden edge of my coffee table. I retrieved a small, high-tech audio recording device I had discreetly activated the very moment she barged in. I pressed a single button, stopping the capture. Madeline had absolutely no idea she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to eventually destroy her. Later that evening, I was sitting in my basement command center when a high-priority encrypted email flashed across my main monitor. It was an urgent intelligence report from Jonathan. The subject line read, Vanguard Environmental Sabotage. I opened the file and stared at the scanned documents sent by our corporate spies embedded within Kensington Group. Richard was aggressively falsifying the mandatory environmental assessment reports for the Vanguard project. He was illegally altering crucial soil toxicity data to bypass strict federal zoning laws and secure his fraudulent funding right now before the looming deadline. I immediately initiated a secure video link with Jonathan. His face appeared on the screen, looking exceptionally grim and tense. Sir, this is a massive federal violation, Jonathan stated, his voice dead serious. Richard is deliberately covering up hazardous chemical contamination on the Vanguard site to successfully pass the preliminary inspection. But that is not even the most sinister part of this operation. Look closely at page 47 of the leaked PDF file. I scrolled down the heavily redacted document and felt a sudden sharp pain radiate through my chest. Right there at the very bottom of the falsified environmental approval form was Kendrick's distinct looping signature. Richard did not sign this official document, I said quietly, my voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch. No, sir, he did not, Jonathan replied, shaking his head slowly. Richard expertly manipulated your son into signing the document as the lead project architect. By placing his signature on that specific line, Kendrick has unknowingly assumed full legal liability for the entire environmental fraud. When the federal investigators inevitably discover this catastrophic deception, Richard will simply claim complete ignorance. He will legally shift all the blame onto the young ambitious architect who blindly signed the papers. What is the exact penalty for this type of federal fraud? I asked, gripping the edge of my glass desk until my knuckles turned white. If convicted, your son is facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a maximum security federal prison, Jonathan answered bluntly. Richard is actively preparing to sacrifice Kendrick as his personal scapegoat the very second this doomed project inevitably collapses. He is handing your boy a loaded gun and telling him it is a beautiful gift. This horrific revelation perfectly exposed my son's dangerous naivety. Kendrick possessed a brilliant architectural mind, but he severely lacked the cynical street smarts required to survive among the ruthless corporate elite. He grew up believing that wealthy men in tailored suits operated with integrity and honor. His blind, desperate trust in his future father-in-law had completely clouded his judgment. He saw Richard as a powerful mentor and a glamorous father figure, utterly failing to recognize the venomous snake hiding just beneath the expensive designer clothing and the fake charming smiles they presented every day. I closed the encrypted file and rubbed my tired eyes. The rage I felt toward Madeline earlier today shifted into a profound, desperate concern for my foolish son. I could easily let the federal agents raid the Kensington offices and arrest them all right now. I had the absolute power to watch them burn. But letting Kendrick go to prison for a crime he did not commit was an unacceptable outcome. He was arrogant and misguided, but he was still my own flesh and blood. I decided I had to give him one final opportunity to wake up from this toxic illusion before the trap snapped shut completely. I picked up my phone and sent a short text message to him. Meet me at the corner cafe near your office tomorrow morning at 8. It is a matter of life and death. I hit send and prayed he would finally choose to listen to reason today before it was entirely too late to save him. The next morning, the tiny roadside cafe was practically empty. I sat in a faded vinyl booth holding a thick brown envelope containing the hard evidence of Richard's federal crimes. Kendrick walked through the door looking exhausted and deeply irritated by my summons. He did not bother to greet me or sit down properly. He stood over the table, crossing his arms defensively. "What do you want, Dad?" he demanded harshly. "I do not have time for another one of your pathetic lectures about humility or the value of hard work right now." I slid the brown envelope across the table toward him. "I am not here to lecture you, Kendrick," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I am here to save your life. Open this envelope. Read the documents. Richard is forging environmental reports for the Vanguard project, and he is using your signature to take the fall. You need to withdraw from Kensington Group immediately." Kendrick stared at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. He did not even reach for it. Instead, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure resentment. He slammed his hand down on the table, accidentally knocking over my cup of hot coffee. The dark liquid spilled across the tabletop and dripped onto my shoes, but I did not flinch. "You are absolutely unbelievable," he shouted, ignoring the mess he just made. "You are so intensely jealous of their wealth and their success that you are actually making up insane conspiracy theories to ruin my career. Richard is a highly respected billionaire with unlimited resources. Why would he ever need to forge anything and risk his massive empire? You are just a bitter old man who has never achieved anything significant in the real business world. You cannot stand the simple fact that I am finally succeeding where you miserably failed all those years ago. You want me to be just as poor and insignificant as you are, so you do not feel so entirely worthless." I pointed at the envelope again, maintaining my absolute composure. "The concrete proof is right there in front of you," I urged gently. "Just look at the papers, Kendrick. They are setting you up for federal prison. They do not care about you at all." His venomous words tore open an old, deep wound. This massive rift between us did not happen overnight. It originated from a severe inferiority complex Kendrick had harbored since his middle school days. He grew up surrounded by wealthy classmates who mocked his thrift store clothes and our modest brick house. He slowly began to equate human worth entirely with financial status and material possessions. He despised our poverty so much that he eventually learned to despise the man who provided for him. He was desperately running from a past he deemed completely unacceptable and utterly shameful. Kendrick aggressively pushed the envelope off the table, letting it fall into the puddle of spilled coffee on the floor. "I am entirely done with you," he declared, his voice shaking with absolute conviction. "Madeline was right about you. You are completely toxic, and you are actively trying to destroy my happiness. I never want to see you or speak to you ever again. Consider our relationship permanently severed as of today. Do not come to my wedding and do not ever contact me again." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the cafe without a single backward glance. I sat perfectly still in the quiet booth watching him walk away through the dirty glass window. My fatherly heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that exact moment. I closed my eyes and took one long, deep breath. When I opened them again, the loving father was entirely dead. All that remained was a ruthless billionaire predator ready to completely annihilate the Kensington family today. The Kensington mansion was a massive fortress of glowing lights and excessive wealth towering over the manicured hills of the Hamptons. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway, reflecting the brilliant chandeliers shining through the grand windows. I bypassed the valet and the security checkpoint, walking straight through the heavy oak double doors and directly into the opulent banquet hall. I was not wearing my faded suit this time. I wore a pair of heavy steel-toed boots and a rough canvas jacket completely splattered with dried white paint and thick gray cement dust right here tonight, standing tall. The lively string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Hundreds of high society guests holding crystal champagne flutes turned their heads to stare at me in absolute shock. The room fell so incredibly silent that you could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. The socialites whispered behind their hands, horrified by the presence of a dirty working-class man standing in their pristine sanctuary. Then, a shrill, furious scream shattered the quiet atmosphere. "What on earth is this filthy beggar doing inside my engagement party?" Madeline shrieked, pointing a shaking diamond-covered finger at my chest. She pushed her way through the crowd of elite politicians and wealthy developers, her face twisted in pure disgust. "You absolutely revolting piece of trash," she yelled, stepping right up to me. "How did you even get past the front gate? You are tracking literal mud onto a $1 million imported rug. Get out of my house right now before I have you arrested for trespassing and burglary." I did not flinch or break eye contact with her. "I just wanted to see my son congratulate him on his engagement," I replied, keeping my voice completely even and steady. Madeline let out a high-pitched, mocking laugh that echoed across the massive hall. "Your son," she scoffed, turning to address the whispering crowd. "Look at this pathetic delusion. Kendrick would never be related to a disgusting homeless scavenger like you. You are a complete embarrassment to human decency. You come in here smelling like a construction site and expect to be treated like a guest. You are nothing but a common street rat trying to ruin the most important night of my entire life." She continued to hurl vile insults, completely unhinged by my sheer defiance standing firm right now today. Hearing her venomous insults about my construction clothes filled me with a deep sense of poetic irony. In the late 1980s, long before I secretly conquered the financial markets, I was a humble laborer. I broke my back pouring the very concrete foundations that these arrogant billionaires now stood upon. I hauled steel beams and stacked heavy bricks, building the luxurious mansions they so proudly flaunted today. They despised the dirt on my jacket, but that very dirt was the actual bedrock of their entire privileged high-class existence, which they completely took for granted right now. Before anyone else could intervene, Richard Kensington stormed through the divided crowd. His face was flushed red with intense aristocratic fury. He held a crystal glass filled to the brim with an incredibly expensive vintage red wine. Without uttering a single word of warning, he aggressively swung his arm and hurled the dark crimson liquid directly onto my chest. The wine splashed violently across my faded canvas jacket and soaked deeply into my old shirt, looking exactly like fresh blood spreading over a battle wound. The crowd gasped collectively at the sudden, shocking display of sheer physical disrespect. There, Richard spat, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated malice. "Now you have a matching stain to go with your absolute worthlessness. This is a private event for people of actual value. You do not belong in this neighborhood, and you certainly do not belong in my house. You are a disgusting parasite. Security will quickly handle you and brutally throw you out immediately right now today." Kendrick finally rushed over from the grand staircase. His custom-tailored tuxedo looked immaculate, creating a painful contrast to my stained and ruined clothing. I looked into his eyes, desperately hoping to see a spark of filial loyalty or basic human decency defending his own father. Instead, his face was a mask of sheer terror and deep social embarrassment. He did not ask if I was all right. He turned his back to me completely and shouted frantically, waving his hands in the air, "Guards, get over here right now and forcefully remove this crazy old intruder immediately today." The absolute betrayal in his voice was a lethal poison injecting straight into my veins. 4 heavily armed security guards immediately sprinted across the banquet hall, grabbing my arms with rough, uncompromising force. "Wait, Kendrick," I said, my voice steady despite the aggressive hands gripping my shoulders. "I am your father. I came here to warn you. Do not do this to me." Kendrick stepped closer, but only to deliver a final verbal execution in front of the entire whispering crowd. "You are not my father," he hissed, his voice shaking with a pathetic, desperate need to impress his wealthy future in-laws. "My father is dead to me. You are nothing but a massive failure, a constant reminder of a miserable life I have entirely escaped. Look at you right now. You are a dirty, pitiful old man crashing a high society event just to beg for attention and money. You disgust me. I am a highly respected architect joining a powerful dynasty, and you are actively trying to sabotage my brilliant future today because you are horribly jealous of my success. Take him out the back service door and throw him onto the street. If he ever shows his face near this property again, call the police and press maximum charges." Madeline stood behind him, resting her head on his shoulder and smiling with vicious, sadistic glee. She softly applauded his cruel, decisive action. Richard smirked, sipping another glass of expensive wine, celebrating his total victory. The guards began to aggressively drag me backward toward the swinging kitchen doors. I did not struggle against their firm grip. I simply locked my hardened gaze onto my son, absorbing every single detail of his cowardly, unforgivable treachery taking place in this highly public, absolutely humiliating moment today. As the heavy kitchen doors swung shut, blocking my view, a vivid memory fiercely pierced my hardened heart. When Kendrick was 5 years old, we attended a crowded summer street festival. He was so terrified of the crushing, massive crowds that I hoisted him safely onto my broad, strong shoulders. I carried him securely for 6 straight hours, ensuring he felt completely protected and invincible, towering above everyone else. I was his absolute superhero back then. Now, those exact same hands I once safely guided had maliciously signaled armed strangers to brutally throw me out like trash today. The security guards aggressively shoved me out the back delivery exit, tossing me forcefully onto the cold, hard pavement of the loading dock alleyway. My wine-soaked shirt clung uncomfortably to my skin, chilling me in the night air. I slowly pushed myself off the dirty asphalt, dusting off my steel-toed boots with calm, deliberate precision. The guards expected me to scream curse or blindly attack the locked metal door in a blind fit of rage. I did none of those useless things. I simply adjusted my collar and smiled a lethal, deeply satisfied smile in the dark shadows. They thought they had successfully humiliated me, but they had missed one crucial, microscopic detail. Right before Richard threw his wine and the guards violently seized me, I had intentionally stumbled forward against his private reserved banquet table. In that fleeting, chaotic second, I swiftly and secretly attached a military-grade micro-audio transmitter directly underneath the polished mahogany edge. I successfully bugged the enemy. At precisely midnight, the heavy steel door of my underground command center sealed shut behind me, locking out the rest of the world. The massive curved monitors cast a cold blue glow across the dark room. I sat in my leather chair, staring intently at the flashing audio icon on the central screen. It was the live feed transmitting directly from the microscopic bug I had successfully planted under Richard Kensington's mahogany banquet table just hours earlier. I took a slow, deliberate breath and firmly pressed play to finally uncover their absolute darkest hidden secrets right now tonight. The crystal-clear audio filled my quiet basement, beginning with the unmistakable sound of clinking champagne glasses and arrogant upper-class laughter. Richard was practically howling with deep sadistic amusement. Did you see the look on that pathetic old man's face when security dragged him out the back door? Richard mocked, his voice slurring slightly from the expensive vintage wine. He actually thought he could just waltz in here and ruin our flawless aesthetic. It was absolutely priceless. Madeline chimed in, her tone dripping with absolute venom and zero remorse. It was completely disgusting, Dad, but honestly, it was the perfect, ultimate test for Kendrick. Did you see how fast he turned on his own father to protect his newfound status with us? He is so desperately eager to please that it is genuinely pathetic. He signed those forged environmental reports without even bothering to read the second page today. Richard chuckled deeply, acknowledging her wicked observation. We just need to keep him happily distracted until the Vanguard project is officially approved and the massive federal funding clears our accounts. Madeline let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed loudly through my basement speakers. Do not worry about him, Dad, she sneered coldly. I will keep playing the loving, devoted fiancé for just a few more weeks. Once the luxury wedding is finalized and the corporate papers are irrevocably sealed, we will immediately kick that stupid black guy to the absolute curb. We will let him take the entire legal fall for the toxic soil fraud and rot in a maximum security federal prison cell while we keep all the development cash. He actually believes I really truly love him so much today. What a spectacular, gullible idiot standing helplessly in our absolute perfect trap right now today. Hearing those vile words triggered a profound realization about the true nature of these generational elites. They did not view other human beings as people with souls or beating hearts. To the Kensington family, working-class individuals and racial minorities were simply disposable pawns on a grand financial chessboard meant to be ruthlessly exploited and discarded the moment their utility expired. They operated with a sickening level of casual cruelty, completely insulated from the devastating real-world consequences of their sociopathic actions, by their immense inherited wealth and their deeply ingrained social privilege acting as an impenetrable shield. I sat perfectly still in the quiet darkness of my command center, processing the sheer magnitude of their evil intentions against my only son. My large hands gripped the padded leather armrests of my chair with such intense, overwhelming force that my fingernails pierced straight through the thick material, digging deeply into my own palms. A thin stream of warm blood slowly trickled down my skin, dripping silently onto the pristine floor below. The physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the lethal inferno of rage completely incinerating my soul. Any lingering trace of paternal hesitation or moral restraint I had harbored toward the Kensington family was officially and permanently erased from my mind tonight. They were actively planning to destroy my son's entire life for their own greedy survival. I reached for my secure, encrypted keyboard and typed a single definitive authorization code, sending it directly to Jonathan. The final financial execution was now completely irreversible, starting immediately, right now, without any mercy tonight, perfectly. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, a high-priority notification shattered the quiet atmosphere of Richard Kensington's expansive corner office. The loud, sharp chime echoed across the massive room, signaling an incoming message marked with extreme urgency. Richard casually set down his cup of imported coffee and leaned over his mahogany desk, clicking open the heavy, bolded email. It was a direct flagged communication from the federal banking syndicate regarding his entire corporate debt portfolio. He adjusted his reading glasses, expecting a standard restructuring update, but what he saw instantly drained the color from his face. Victoria Kensington burst through the heavy double doors of the office, clutching her own vibrating tablet in absolute terror. "Richard, what is happening?" she screamed, her voice cracking in pure panic now. "All of our corporate accounts are showing massive red warnings. My personal platinum credit cards were just aggressively declined at the luxury designer boutique downtown today." Richard stood up so quickly his heavy leather chair crashed backward onto the expensive carpet. He stared at the glowing computer screen, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "They sold us Victoria." He gasped, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Every single one of our primary lenders just simultaneously offloaded our entire debt profile instantly. The full $400 million of our toxic liabilities has been aggressively bought out in cash overnight by a completely anonymous predatory investment fund. We no longer owe multiple patient banks. We owe one single ruthless entity." Victoria grabbed the edge of the desk, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wood. "What does that mean for our future?" she demanded, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch right now. "It means they triggered the immediate acceleration clauses," Richard yelled, slamming his fist down hard on the desk. "This invisible buyer is clearly not interested in negotiating extended terms or accepting our pathetic excuses. The email explicitly states we have exactly 72 short hours to produce the entire $400 million balance in fully liquid cash. If we miss this impossible deadline by a single minute, they will instantly trigger a hostile corporate takeover. They will legally freeze all our remaining assets, seize this entire skyscraper, immediately liquidate our private Hamptons mansion, and completely obliterate the Kensington legacy in front of the entire watching world, without a single drop of mercy or hesitation today." For the very first time in their incredibly privileged lives, the mighty Kensington family was forcibly tasting the bitter, suffocating fear that working-class families experience every single day. They were finally feeling the exact same gut-wrenching panic of an impending eviction notice, the terrifying uncertainty of a completely empty bank account, and the absolute crushing weight of an unpayable debt. The protective golden bubble of their generational wealth had just violently popped, leaving them completely exposed, vulnerable, and entirely powerless against an unseen monster they could not buy off or casually intimidate properly right now, today. Richard grabbed the heavy landline receiver on his desk, his hands trembling so violently he could barely press the blinking buttons. He punched the direct extension for his executive secretary, his face covered in a thick layer of cold, terrified sweat. "Listen to me very carefully," he ordered, his voice hoarse and completely devoid of his usual commanding arrogance. "I need you to cancel every single meeting on my calendar right now. Call our legal team. Call our financial brokers today. I need you to scour every federal database and uncover the true identity of the individuals managing Apex Holdings. Do whatever it takes, find a direct phone number, secure a private email address, or get me a physical meeting with their chairman. Offer them anything they want. Tell them I am willing to negotiate completely on their terms without any resistance. We have to beg them for a temporary extension before we lose absolutely everything we own in exactly 72 short hours today." Inside my secure command center, the sharp ringing of an encrypted line pierced the heavy silence. Jonathan answered immediately, placing the call on speaker so I could hear every single pathetic syllable clearly. The caller ID flashed a private number, but the frantic voice belonged undeniably to Richard Kensington. The arrogant billionaire who had thrown a drink on me just hours ago was now hyperventilating into his receiver. He was calling Apex Holdings incessantly, desperate to reach the unknown predator who now owned his very soul. He sounded like a cornered animal begging for his actual life today. "Please, you must connect me with your chairman," Richard pleaded, his voice shaking with raw terror. "I represent the Kensington Group. We received the aggressive acceleration notice regarding our corporate debt portfolio. There has to be a reasonable way to negotiate this unexpected transition. We have extensive assets. We have the Vanguard project." Jonathan maintained his icy professional tone, completely unaffected by the billionaire's sheer panic. "Our mandate is clear, Mr. Kensington. Full liquid payment is required within 72 hours. We are not interested in standard negotiations or extended terms." Richard let out a choked, desperate gasp. "Listen to me," he begged, abandoning all his usual corporate pride. "We urgently need the Vanguard land parcel that your firm quietly purchased. If Apex Holdings agrees to sell us that specific 70-acre downtown plot today, I can secure immediate federal backing. I can leverage that massive development to satisfy the entire $400 million debt we owe you. I will pay double the market value for that land. Just grant me a physical meeting with your chairman to finalize the contracts before the deadline expires. Please, I am asking you as a businessman to save my entire legacy from total destruction right now." Jonathan looked at me through the video feed, waiting silently for my explicit command. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well, Mr. Kensington," Jonathan replied smoothly. "Our chairman has agreed to hear your desperate proposal in person. You will host us in your executive boardroom on the 50th floor of the Kensington Tower. The meeting will commence exactly at 8 o'clock this Friday morning. Do not be late." Richard exhaled a loud, shuddering breath of profound relief. "Thank you," he stammered weakly. "We will have everything prepared. Thank you so much." Listening to Richard degrade himself was a fascinating psychological study. Men like him spent their entire lives perched on inherited pedestals, genuinely believing their bloodline made them untouchable gods among common mortals. Their extreme arrogance was rarely tested by genuine hardship or existential financial threats. They ruled through fear and intimidation, backed by mountains of endless capital. But the absolute second that financial safety net was violently ripped away, their false superiority vanished completely. Beneath the expensive tailored suits and the highly polished vocabulary, they were nothing but fragile cowards, entirely incapable of surviving a real fight today. The secure line clicked dead, leaving the basement in absolute silence once again. I sat back in my chair, interlacing my fingers in the dark shadows of the room. The trap was now fully set, and the prey was eagerly waiting to be slaughtered in his own sanctuary. "Jonathan," I commanded, my voice echoing with a lethal, icy precision. "Prepare every single legal document, finalize the immediate foreclosure notices, and coordinate the complete asset seizure protocols with our federal contacts. We are going to completely obliterate their remaining hope right now." Jonathan nodded sharply, adjusting his silver tie. "It will be an absolute massacre, sir. Are you certain you want to attend this final execution personally?" I stood up from my desk, my towering frame casting a long, dark shadow across the glowing monitors. Absolutely, I replied, a grim smile touching my lips. They demanded to meet the chairman of Apex Holdings to beg for their miserable lives. This Friday morning, I will gladly grant them their ultimate final wish. While I was meticulously planning their financial execution, Kendrick was sitting in his upscale apartment staring at a highly disturbing set of digital files. He had logged into the corporate network to review the Vanguard blueprints, but accidentally opened the restricted folder containing the final environmental soil reports. The raw data on his screen did not match the sanitized documents he had physically signed days earlier. The actual toxicity levels were dangerously high, proving the site was heavily contaminated and entirely illegal to develop. He realized with rising horror that he had authorized a massive, catastrophic federal fraud. "Madeline," he shouted, his voice trembling with sheer panic as she walked into the room carrying shopping bags. "You need to look at these internal files right now. Your father completely lied to me. He heavily altered the chemical data before giving me the final approval forms to sign. The entire Vanguard site is a toxic hazard, and he is using my personal signature to push this illegal development past the federal regulators. If they find out, I am going to prison for a very long time." Madeline dropped her designer bags and rushed over, her face hardening instantly. "You are completely overreacting, Kendrick," she snapped quickly, closing the laptop screen. "It is just a minor bureaucratic discrepancy. My father knows exactly what he is doing to get this project fully approved." Kendrick backed away from her, his eyes wide with profound disbelief. "It is not a discrepancy, Madeline," he argued desperately. "It is a massive federal felony. We are knowingly endangering public health and committing massive corporate fraud. I have to report this to the authorities immediately to clear my name before it is entirely too late to save myself." Madeline realized her aggressive approach was failing, so she instantly shifted her tactics. Her cold eyes suddenly filled with large, dramatic tears. She collapsed onto the expensive sofa, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. "How could you be so incredibly selfish, Kendrick?" she wailed, her voice trembling with expertly faked agony. "If you expose my father, you will destroy my entire family. We will lose absolutely everything we have, and right now, of all times." She looked up at him, her mascara perfectly smudged. "I just took a test this morning, Kendrick. I am pregnant with our first baby. Are you really going to send your child's grandfather to a federal prison today?" Kendrick fundamentally possessed a strong moral conscience inherited from his hard-working mother. He knew the undeniable difference between right and wrong. However, his greatest fatal flaw was his blinding, desperate craving for a picture-perfect upper-class family. Growing up without a mother and resenting our modest lifestyle left him with a deep psychological void. He idolized the glamorous, aristocratic image the Kensingtons projected. The very thought of destroying that beautiful illusion and raising a child in a broken, disgraced family terrified him far more than committing a federal crime or betraying his own profound personal integrity completely today. The devastating fake news of a pregnancy struck Kendrick like a physical blow to the chest. He stared at Madeline, watching her weep pitifully on the couch, and his strong moral resolve instantly crumbled into dust. The undeniable truth of the fraudulent documents was glaring right at him, but the heavy weight of this new fabricated family tied his hands completely. He slowly sank onto his knees beside the sofa and wrapped his arms tightly around her shaking shoulders, pulling her close to his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered, blindly comforting the very monster actively planning his demise. "I will not say anything to anyone. We will figure this out together. I promise I will protect our family." Madeline buried her face in his neck, hiding a wicked, triumphant smile. By choosing to ignore the massive fraud, Kendrick had officially surrendered his innocence. He voluntarily transformed himself into a willing accomplice to their corporate crimes, permanently severing his very last viable escape route right now today. Friday morning arrived with a cold, biting chill. I stood before the cracked mirror in my small bathroom. The sun had not yet risen, but I was wide awake. I picked up my silver razor and slowly, carefully shaved off the patchy gray beard I had intentionally maintained for the past decade. With every deliberate stroke, the image of the poor, helpless old retiree washed down the ceramic drain. I was shedding the fragile disguise I had worn to test my son and his toxic new family. The pathetic old man was officially dead and buried today. At exactly 6:00, my private Italian tailor knocked on the heavy front door. He did not ask questions about the rundown neighborhood or the peeling paint. He simply stepped inside and carefully carried in a garment bag containing a custom-fitted $15,000 suit cut from the finest dark charcoal wool available in the world. I slipped into the crisp white shirt and fastened the heavy silk tie, feeling the familiar weight of pure absolute authority settle onto my broad shoulders. The expensive fabric draped perfectly across my frame, projecting an intimidating and completely flawless silhouette. Next, I opened a velvet box and strapped a limited edition Patek Philippe timepiece onto my left wrist. Its intricate gears ticked with a lethal precision, perfectly matching my own calculated heartbeat. Finally, I slid my feet into a pair of highly polished black alligator leather shoes that gleamed aggressively under the modest living room lights. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The transformation was absolutely staggering and entirely complete. The aura of a defeated working-class senior was entirely gone without a single trace. In its place stood a towering, unyielding titan of industry. The sheer oppressive power radiating from my upright posture was heavy enough to suck the oxygen straight out of the room. I was no longer a victim waiting for a miserable handout from arrogant billionaires. I was the executioner actively preparing for the ultimate financial slaughter. Every piece of clothing I wore served as a stark reminder of the immense, undeniable power I held over the Kensington family right now. My enemies were totally unaware of my wrath today. This was not a mere costume, but a return to my deep roots. This was my true, authentic form. I was the alpha wolf who had ruthlessly manipulated the cutthroat landscape of Wall Street 2 decades ago. I built my massive empire by completely devastating arrogant men who fatally underestimated my intellect because of the color of my skin. I retreated to the quiet shadows to raise Kendrick with humble values, but the beast inside me never actually died. It had merely been sleeping, waiting patiently for a worthy reason to hunt again today. A low, powerful hum vibrated through the quiet suburban street, shaking the fragile window panes of my old brick house. I stepped out onto the crumbling porch as a pristine, pitch-black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a smooth, silent halt right in front of my cracked driveway. The massive luxury vehicle looked like an alien spaceship invading a forgotten slum. My heavily armed private security detail immediately stepped out, forming a secure protective perimeter around the vehicle. One of my men sharply opened the heavy rear door, bowing his head respectfully as I approached. I did not look back at the humble home that had served as my fortress of deception for so many long years. I stepped directly into the lavish leather interior of the vehicle, fully embracing the cold, merciless billionaire I truly was. The game of hiding was officially over right now today. I settled into the plush back seat of the Rolls-Royce where Jonathan was already waiting. He looked remarkably sharp in a navy blue suit, perfectly matching my own intense energy. Without saying a single word, he opened a sleek black leather briefcase resting on his lap. He pulled out a thick stack of heavy legal documents and handed them to me. The top page was boldly stamped in bright red ink with the words, "Asset seizure and immediate foreclosure." The crisp, thick paper felt incredibly heavy in my hands, carrying the absolute weight of total financial destruction today. "Everything is securely in place, Sir," Jonathan reported, his voice vibrating with a dangerous thrill. "The federal trap has been fully armed and is ready to spring shut. I have personally coordinated with our contacts at the highest levels. A specialized tactical unit from the Federal Bureau of Investigation alongside elite agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission have already surrounded the Kensington Tower. They are currently positioned in unmarked vehicles, completely covering every possible exit and entrance. They are simply waiting for your explicit signal to storm the building and execute the massive arrest warrants." I looked down at the red stamps on the paperwork, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. "We hold the absolute legal right to instantly liquidate their entire $400 million debt profile," I stated firmly, running my finger over Richard's forged signatures. "Exactly, sir." Jonathan nodded enthusiastically. "Furthermore, the FBI has successfully verified the digital IP address we extracted from the forged environmental reports. They possess concrete, undeniable proof that Richard and Victoria actively manipulated the toxic soil data themselves. They cannot blame Kendrick for this catastrophic fraud. They are entirely cornered with absolutely no legal defense available to them." "Good," I murmured, staring out the tinted window as the city blurred past us. "I want Richard Kensington to feel the exact same level of humiliating helplessness he tried to force upon my son. I want him to look out the glass windows of his towering executive boardroom and realize that his entire billionaire empire is burning to the ground. I want Madeline to understand that she severely underestimated the wrong family. They thought they could casually destroy us. Today we will aggressively, completely, and permanently erase their entire legacy from existence right now. The sheer scope of this operation perfectly demonstrated the unparalleled reach of my invisible network. Ordinary wealthy men could buy expensive cars or lavish mansions, but true absolute power meant possessing the ability to seamlessly mobilize federal government agencies overnight. Over the decades, I had heavily funded political campaigns, backed massive infrastructural reforms, and quietly secured deep loyalty from extremely powerful individuals across the nation. My influence was entirely untraceable but lethally effective. The Kensingtons were foolishly bringing a decorative silver butter knife to a massive, catastrophic nuclear war that I had already definitively won years ago today. The powerful Rolls-Royce glided smoothly onto the bustling morning highway, smoothly weaving through the heavy traffic like a dark shark in shallow waters. I sat back against the premium leather, absorbing the quiet tension vibrating inside the opulent cabin. I glanced at my Patek Philippe watch. The glowing hands perfectly aligned. The clock struck exactly 7:50 in the morning. We were precisely 10 minutes away from the ultimate confrontation. The sky outside the tinted windows was dark and heavy, loaded with thick gray clouds threatening to unleash a violent torrential downpour. It was incredibly fitting weather. The Kensington family was currently sitting in their penthouse boardroom, likely sipping expensive champagne and celebrating what they foolishly believed was their imminent financial salvation. They had absolutely no idea that the darkest, most destructive storm of their entire miserable lives was speeding directly toward them right now. The countdown was officially over. It was finally time for the ultimate slaughter today. High above the city on the 50th floor, the Kensington Executive Boardroom was a pristine glass sanctuary of assumed victory. The morning sun illuminated the expensive mahogany furniture and the breathtaking panoramic skyline. Richard, Victoria, Madeline, and my son Kendrick stood around the massive table laughing loudly as they popped a bottle of imported champagne to celebrate their imminent financial salvation. The cork hit the ceiling with a festive pop. A fraction of a second later, the heavy double oak doors were violently kicked open, slamming against the glass walls with an explosive, deafening crash that shook the room. I stepped through the shattered doorway, my custom $15,000 Italian suit absorbing the morning light. I walked with the slow, measured, heavy steps of a conquering king entering his newly acquired throne room. My face was a mask of cold, ruthless stone, completely devoid of any mercy. Richard dropped his crystal champagne flute, spilling the expensive liquid across the imported carpet. "What the hell is this?" Richard roared, his face turning violently red. "How did this garbage old man get past the lobby desk? Security, get in here and throw this trespassing, filthy animal off the balcony right now." Two massive armed bodyguards wearing Kensington security badges lunged aggressively across the boardroom, charging directly at me with their hands outstretched. They expected to easily tackle a frail, defenseless senior citizen. They were profoundly mistaken. Before they could even come within 3 feet of my tailored jacket, my own private elite security detail materialized from the hallway like dark, lethal shadows. My elite mercenaries moved with terrifying military precision. In exactly 1 second, a series of brutal, sickening cracks echoed through the boardroom. My men instantly neutralized the threat, twisting the charging bodyguards' arms violently behind their backs and driving their faces forcefully into the hardwood floor. The Kensington guards groaned in agonizing pain, completely pinned and entirely immobilized by heavy combat boots pressing firmly against their necks. The swift, brutal application of absolute violence completely paralyzed the room. I did not even break my stride, casually stepping over the subdued guards as I walked directly toward the head of the mahogany boardroom table, projecting an aura of pure, unmatched authority and undeniable dominance today. My eyes locked onto Richard, daring him to make another foolish command in my presence. The sudden eruption of raw, brutal violence inside their pristine, untouchable sanctuary sent a massive shockwave through the elite family. High society billionaires like the Kensingtons lived entirely insulated lives, believing their immense wealth offered an invisible, magical shield against the gritty, harsh realities of the physical world. They casually destroyed working-class lives using ink and legal paper entirely disconnected from real physical consequences. Seeing heavily armed men violently dismantled on their expensive imported rugs completely shattered their fragile aristocratic illusion, plunging them directly into a primal, visceral state of sheer, unadulterated terror right now, today. Richard Kensington stumbled backward, his perfectly polished leather shoes sliding clumsily against the wet, champagne-soaked carpet. His arrogant posture evaporated instantly, replaced by the trembling, frantic movements of a terrified prey animal facing an apex predator. He stared at me with wide, bulging eyes, completely unable to comprehend the horrifying reality standing right in front of him. The poor black man he had mercilessly insulted and thrown out of his mansion was no longer a pathetic victim. Instead, I was radiating a suffocating heavy aura of absolute killer intent that made the air in the room feel incredibly dense and toxic. Victoria clutched her pearl necklace, gasping for air as she pressed herself tightly against the glass window, seeking a desperate escape route that simply did not exist. Madeline stood frozen, her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. I stood tall at the head of the table, commanding the entire room without speaking a single solitary word today. Richard slammed his trembling hands down onto the thick mahogany table, trying desperately to regain some semblance of authority in his own hijacked building. "Kendrick, what is wrong with you?" Richard screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. "Call the police right now. Tell them your insane father brought armed thugs into my building. Have this worthless piece of trash arrested and thrown into a jail cell for the rest of his miserable life. Get him out of my sight before he ruins our monumental financial meeting today, you stupid boy, right now." I slowly turned my intense gaze toward my son. Kendrick was standing near the expansive window, holding a half-empty glass of vintage champagne. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting frantically between my expensive custom-tailored Italian suit, my gleaming limited-edition Patek Philippe watch, and the terrifying mercenaries securing the perimeter. The crystal glass slipped from his trembling fingers, crashing onto the floor and shattering into dozens of sharp, glittering fragments. The loud noise barely registered over his heavy, erratic breathing. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He simply stuttered, swallowing hard as a profound, paralyzing realization washed over him. "Dad," he finally whispered, his voice incredibly small and fragile, completely stripped of the arrogant superiority he had displayed at the coffee shop. "What are you wearing? How did you get those men?" Kendrick took a hesitant step backward, his expensive designer suit suddenly looking incredibly cheap and poorly fitted compared to my immaculate, imposing presence. He looked at Madeline pleadingly, but she was too busy cowering behind her wealthy parents to offer him any manipulative support. My son was completely speechless, entirely unable to process the magnificent regal appearance of the man he had ruthlessly mocked and cruelly discarded just days prior. He raised a shaking hand, pointing a finger at me as if trying to physically identify a phantom. "You are supposed to be poor," he stammered weakly, his reality violently fracturing into a million irreparable pieces. "You are just a retired old man living on a fixed pension. Why are you acting like you own this place today?" I did not answer his pathetic, desperate questions. I simply maintained my towering, stony silence, letting his severe confusion deeply punish his traitorous soul right now. For the very first time in his entire adult life, Kendrick felt a crushing, overwhelming sense of utter insignificance standing before me. He had spent years running away from his heritage, desperately chasing the superficial approval of arrogant white billionaires because he firmly believed I represented absolute failure. He traded his profound loyalty and his own father for a fake golden ticket into high society. Now, looking at my undeniable, majestic power, he finally realized he had blindly traded away a massive, brilliant diamond for a handful of worthless, dirty rocks, causing immense internal psychological agony today. Before Kendrick could utter another pathetic, desperate question, Jonathan confidently stepped up beside me. My brilliant lead attorney moved with cold, calculated precision, carrying a sleek, heavy black leather briefcase. He dropped the briefcase squarely onto the center of the mahogany table, resulting in a loud, authoritative thud that silenced everyone in the room. Jonathan slowly unbuttoned his navy suit jacket and offered Richard a chilling, completely empty smile. "Greetings, Mr. Richard Kensington," Jonathan announced, his voice echoing with absolute lethality across the boardroom. "You requested an urgent physical meeting to beg for your corporate survival today. Allow me to formally introduce the man you summoned, This is Mr. Jerome, the sole chairman and exclusive chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, the man you deliberately insulted, the man you banned from your daughter's wedding, and the man you foolishly tried to buy off with a pathetic $10,000 check, officially owns every single thing you possess right now. The entire executive boardroom plunged into a suffocating, absolutely dead silence following Jonathan's earth-shattering introduction. The sheer weight of the revelation sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the massive glass room. Victoria Kensington's heavily Botoxed face turned as horrifically pale as a freshly embalmed corpse, her hands shaking violently at her sides. Madeline stood completely paralyzed, her jaw dropping wide open in an incredibly ungraceful display of profound shock and total disbelief. They stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally comprehending the lethal magnitude of the monster they had so carelessly awakened right now today. I did not look at any of them. My gaze remained entirely fixed on the center of the large mahogany table where Richard had previously laid out his desperate salvation. I calmly reached out and picked up the thick, neatly bound Vanguard land purchase contract. The heavy, glossy paper represented the exact foundation of their entire future survival. Without uttering a single solitary syllable or breaking my terrifying stoic expression, I gripped the thick document with both of my strong hands. I slowly and deliberately tore the entire contract completely in half right in front of Richard's bulging, panicked eyes. The loud, sharp ripping sound echoed violently, like a gunshot across the pristine boardroom, shattering their last remaining illusions. I tossed the destroyed pieces casually onto the glass surface, watching them scatter like worthless trash. That specific piece of prime downtown real estate is no longer available for any commercial acquisition, I stated, my voice resonating with an icy, chilling finality that left absolutely no room for negotiation. I have officially decided to repurpose those exact 70 acres. I am going to build a completely free public park for the local working-class community to enjoy safely. I am absolutely not selling that land to your corrupt, failing corporation. Richard let out a highly pathetic whimpering sound, grabbing the edge of the table to prevent his weak knees from completely buckling underneath his weight. "You cannot possibly do this to us, Jerome," he gasped, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "We desperately need that specific zoning approval to secure our massive federal funding by tomorrow morning. Without the Vanguard property, our entire corporate infrastructure collapses instantly. Please, you have to reconsider this brash decision immediately, right now, today, in this very specific, isolated boardroom, completely abandoning your heavy, lingering, massive rage." The highly exclusive Vanguard project was the single, isolated lifeline, keeping the heavily bleeding Kensington enterprise floating above total, catastrophic ruin. Richard had spent countless agonizing months fabricating environmental assessments and illegally promising guaranteed returns to vicious private lenders just to secure this precise developmental location. The heavily leveraged foundation of their generational wealth was constructed entirely upon the assumption that this massive architectural achievement would successfully launch. By casually destroying that crucial physical contract, I was effectively cutting the very last frayed safety rope holding their sinking billion-dollar Titanic above the dark, crushing oceanic depths today. Richard desperately attempted to force a highly unnatural, appeasing smile onto his sweating face, showcasing a truly nauseating display of utter cowardice. He aggressively rubbed his trembling hands together, bowing his head in an intensely submissive posture that completely contradicted his previously projected high society arrogance. "Jerome, please accept my deepest, most profound apologies for our earlier unacceptable behavior," Richard stammered, practically weeping openly in front of his thoroughly horrified wife and daughter. "We deeply misunderstood the complex dynamics of your impressive financial standing. You must realize that we are practically family now. Our brilliant children are deeply passionately in love with each other. We are going to be wonderful, joyous in-laws sharing beautiful future grandchildren together. We can absolutely find a highly lucrative, mutually beneficial compromise that successfully protects the Grand Kensington legacy while generously rewarding your incredible investment acumen. Let us completely forget the ugly, unfortunate misunderstandings of the past and look forward to a glorious, unified future right now, today." I casually ignored his pathetic sniveling excuses and systematically crushed his absolute final fragment of lingering hope. I reached back into Jonathan's sleek open briefcase, extracting an incredibly thick, heavily bound stack of aggressive legal dossiers prominently displaying the terrifying label of primary creditor across the dark cover. I violently slammed the massive foreclosure file directly onto the pristine glass table, causing a loud, terrifying boom that aggressively jolted every single person currently standing paralyzed inside the expansive boardroom. The heavy, definitive sound permanently severed any remaining possibility of a peaceful resolution between our completely divided families today. We are absolutely not family, Richard. I pronounced, my voice projecting a cold, unyielding frequency that completely dominated the physical space of the massive glass room. You aggressively demanded full liquid payment of your massive corporate liabilities, and I am officially here today to aggressively collect my undisputed heavy financial dues. I sharply tapped my right index finger repeatedly against the thick, rigid cover of the ultimate foreclosure documentation. According to the strict acceleration clauses embedded deep within your consolidated toxic debt profile, your mandatory grace period officially expired exactly 2 full hours ago at precisely 8 o'clock this morning. You have monumentally failed to produce the $400 million required to satisfy this aggressive outstanding loan. Therefore, as the sole overarching controlling entity of Apex Holdings, I am officially and permanently confiscating every single tangible asset currently registered under the disgraced Kensington name. I am aggressively seizing absolute ownership of this entire 50-story commercial tower immediately. I am legally appropriating your sprawling luxury mansion securely hidden within the exclusive Hamptons Country Club. I am aggressively seizing your entire highly prized fleet of imported Italian supercars, effectively rendering your personal garage completely empty. Furthermore, my elite financial operators have already successfully triggered the immediate unyielding lockdown protocols restricting every single platinum credit card, personal checking account, and offshore trust fund you falsely believed were completely untouchable. You are completely, entirely, and irrevocably cut off from the global financial system right now. The vast generational wealth you weaponize to systematically oppress, manipulate, and violently humiliate hardworking, honest individuals like myself has been completely wiped from existence. You possess absolutely nothing but the expensive tailored garments currently resting upon your extremely sweaty, trembling backs in this very specific, catastrophic, intensely isolated moment today, right now, forever. The mighty Kensington dynasty was officially and unequivocally reduced to absolute nothingness within a single devastating morning. These inherently arrogant individuals had proudly spent their entire miserable existence violently stepping on the vulnerable backs of struggling minority communities, ruthlessly destroying countless innocent families to artificially elevate their fraudulent aristocratic status. Now they were suddenly violently shoved directly back into the exact same suffocating, horrific poverty they had so endlessly mocked and heavily despised. The impenetrable golden fortress they had aggressively defended for decades was successfully breached and permanently demolished, leaving them incredibly exposed and utterly defenseless today perfectly. Richard let out a highly agonizing, guttural groan, heavily clutching the left side of his tailored suit jacket as an intense shooting pain violently ripped through his rapidly palpitating chest. He dramatically stumbled forward weakly, grabbing the back of a luxury leather chair before fully collapsing backward onto the plush carpeted floor, completely overwhelmed by the horrific finality of his total financial destruction. Victoria let out a piercing, incredibly shrill shriek, throwing her heavily jeweled hands violently over her pale face as she aggressively dropped to her knees beside her hyperventilating husband, weeping hysterically like a deeply traumatized child. The legendary high-class sophistication they had so aggressively weaponized against my family had entirely evaporated, transforming them instantly into pathetic, broken creatures hopelessly writhing on the pristine glass floor. The unprecedented financial massacre was flawlessly complete, completely satisfying my deeply rooted craving for ultimate retribution. I stared coldly at their suffering, absolutely refusing to offer even a single microscopic drop of basic human sympathy today. Seeing her parents completely destroyed on the floor, Madeline instantly shifted her entire demeanor. She aggressively latched onto Kendrick's stiff arm, forcing large, fake tears to cascade down her perfectly contoured cheeks. She desperately attempted to play the innocent, helpless victim, pretending she had absolutely no idea about her parents' massive financial crimes or their impending bankruptcy. She sobbed loudly, burying her face deeply against his tailored shoulder, hoping his blind, naive love would miraculously shield her from my unyielding wrath and provide a safe escape from this terrifying situation unfolding rapidly in the room right now, today. I did not waste a single solitary syllable arguing with her pathetic theatrical performance. Her fabricated tears were utterly useless against cold, hard, undeniable evidence. I calmly reached into the inner breast pocket of my custom Italian suit and retrieved the sleek digital audio recorder I had securely synchronized with the hidden microphone from their lavish engagement party. Without breaking eye contact with the shivering woman, I firmly pressed the play button and turned the volume to its absolute maximum setting. The crystal-clear audio recording instantly echoed across the expansive glass boardroom, completely overpowering her fake sobbing. Madeline's own cruel, arrogant voice filled the silent space, dripping with sheer venom and racial contempt. Once the luxury wedding is finalized and the corporate papers are irrevocably sealed, we will immediately kick that stupid black guy to the absolute curb, she sneered through the digital speaker. We will let him take the entire legal fall for the toxic soil fraud and rot in a maximum security federal prison cell while we keep all the development cash. He actually believes I really truly love him so much today. What a spectacular, gullible idiot standing helplessly in our absolute perfect trap right now today. The horrific recording continued to play, highlighting her wicked laughter and her father's arrogant agreement. Every single vile word she had spoken in secret was now completely exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the executive suite. I stood perfectly still, holding the small device like a lethal weapon, allowing her own vicious statements to aggressively dismantle her entire fragile defense. She had foolishly believed her malicious secrets were safe in the shadows, but I had forcefully dragged them into the blinding daylight to completely annihilate her deceptive character directly in front of her devoted fiancé today. The thick, deceptive mask of pure, innocent love Madeline had spent years carefully cultivating was now ruthlessly ripped away without a single ounce of mercy. She had meticulously manipulated my son, making him firmly believe he had found a genuine soulmate who looked completely past his race and working-class roots. She systematically isolated him from his true heritage, molding him into the perfect disposable asset for her family's corrupt corporate machinery. Now that beautiful golden illusion was violently destroyed, revealing the grotesque, calculating monster hiding directly beneath her expensive cosmetics and designer clothing every single day. Madeline instantly stopped her fake crying as the devastating audio recording finished playing. Her mouth snapped shut, and she slowly backed away from Kendrick, her face completely drained of all its vibrant color until she looked entirely ghost white. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled violently as they dropped away from his tailored suit jacket. The undeniable concrete proof of her malicious betrayal hung heavily in the tense boardroom air, leaving her with absolutely no plausible excuses or manipulative lies to hide behind anymore. She was completely trapped in a corner of her own making, entirely exposed as a vicious, predatory fraud. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. All eyes naturally turned away from the sobbing billionaire parents on the floor and focused entirely on Kendrick. The young architect stood completely rigid in the center of the room, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the horrific truth that had just been aggressively forced upon him in this incredibly tense moment today. Kendrick stood absolutely stunned in the middle of the expensive boardroom, his eyes wide and severely bloodshot. He stared blankly at the beautiful woman he was preparing to marry in just a few short weeks. This was the exact same woman who had tearfully manipulated him into ignoring massive federal fraud just yesterday by falsely claiming she was carrying his unborn child. He looked directly at her trembling figure as if he were staring at a terrifying, unfamiliar stranger, completely unable to reconcile the sweet, loving fiancé he knew with the racist monster on the recording. The crushing, devastating realization hit Kendrick with the heavy, destructive force of a runaway freight train. He finally understood that he had aggressively rejected his own incredibly hardworking father, a man who had literally starved himself to provide for him just to serve as a disposable puppet for a family of highly toxic, venomous snakes. He had foolishly traded a lifetime of unconditional paternal devotion for a shallow, fake relationship built entirely upon racist manipulation and severe financial exploitation. The immense shame and agonizing regret aggressively boiled up from the very deepest pit of his stomach. A sudden, raw, animalistic roar of pure emotional agony violently erupted from his throat, echoing loudly across the entire glass floor of the penthouse suite. The intense sound was filled with years of misplaced frustration and the sudden terrifying clarity of his own monumental stupidity. Madeline desperately reached her shaking hands out toward him, attempting to utter a pathetic apology, but Kendrick violently recoiled from her touch as if she were made of burning acid. With a swift, aggressive motion, he forcefully shoved her away from him, throwing her violently backward. Madeline lost her delicate balance on her expensive high heels and crashed hard onto the cold, unforgiving glass floor, her designer dress tangling around her legs. She landed awkwardly right next to her heavily sobbing mother, completely stripped of her usual arrogant grace. Kendrick stood towering over her, his chest heaving rapidly as he looked down at the pathetic, wealthy family that had successfully brainwashed him for years. His absolute blind obedience was permanently broken, completely replaced by a ferocious, burning hatred for the people who had maliciously plotted to send him to a federal prison today without any mercy. This exact moment marked the absolute peak of his completely crumbling faith. Kendrick's entire meticulously constructed worldview shattered into millions of irreparable pieces right before his very eyes. He had spent his entire adult life deeply worshiping the elite upper class, genuinely believing their massive generational wealth naturally equated to superior morality and flawless human character. He had aggressively chased their fleeting validation while actively abandoning his own true identity. Now he was forcibly staring directly at their incredibly rotten core, finally understanding that their glamorous, shiny exterior hid nothing but pure, unadulterated evil and profound moral bankruptcy. Madeline let out a loud, dramatic wail, aggressively crawling across the polished glass floor to fiercely grab hold of Kendrick's tailored pant leg. She sobbed hysterically, clinging to him with sheer pathetic desperation, loudly begging him to listen to her fabricated excuses and completely ignore the concrete audio evidence. But Kendrick was entirely numb to her toxic manipulations now. He aggressively kicked his leg free, forcing her to release her desperate grip and leaving her sobbing miserably on the ground. The pristine, unified front of the elite Kensington family was now completely and irrevocably shattered. Richard yelled at Madeline, blaming her careless mouth for exposing their criminal plans, while Victoria screamed back at Richard for failing to secure the Vanguard project in the first place. The once proud and untouchable aristocrats immediately began to viciously tear each other apart like starving wild animals turning on their own kin in a desperate, completely futile attempt to survive this total, absolute annihilation today. Richard Kensington was no longer a sophisticated billionaire, but a cornered, rabid dog frothing at the mouth. He violently shoved his weeping wife aside and lunged toward his expensive leather briefcase, kicking a shattered crystal glass out of his path. His hands were shaking frantically as he ripped open the top compartment and pulled out a thick manila folder, clutching it against his chest like a final pathetic shield. He yanked out a highly sensitive legal document and aggressively thrust it directly toward my face, his eyes burning with a chaotic, psychotic desperation right now in this room today. Do not think for one single second that you have completely won this war, you arrogant old fool. Richard spat, his voice echoing with absolute venom. He wildly slapped the paper heavily against the glass table, pointing a trembling, aggressive finger at the bottom of the printed page. You aggressively pushed me into total bankruptcy today, and I swear to God I will immediately hand this original document straight over to the federal authorities. Take a very close and careful look at this specific legal paperwork now, Jerome. That is the final environmental assessment report for the contaminated Vanguard project, and that is your precious son's official signature authorizing the entire massive fraud. If my magnificent empire burns to the ground today, I am dragging your stupid, gullible boy directly into the blazing inferno with me. Kendrick will be formally indicted for severe corporate conspiracy and environmental sabotage. He will serve a minimum of 10 brutal years in a maximum security federal penitentiary surrounded by violent criminals. Richard let out a harsh, breathless laugh, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of pure, unadulterated malice. You may control the massive debt portfolio, but I control the definitive criminal evidence. We can call off this ridiculous hostile takeover right now and walk away as equal partners, or I will absolutely destroy your only child's entire future with a single phone call. You came here to aggressively ruin my pristine legacy, but I hold the absolute power to throw your own flesh and blood behind cold iron bars. What is your final absolute choice, Jerome? Are you truly and completely willing to violently sacrifice your only son's entire freedom just to selfishly satisfy your pathetic personal vendetta against my wealthy elite family right now in this specific room today? This horrific threat perfectly showcased the despicable parasitic nature of the ultra-wealthy elite. They operated with a sickening fundamental belief that their opulent lives were infinitely more valuable than anyone else. When their fraudulent castles inevitably collapsed, they never accepted personal accountability or faced the consequences with basic human dignity. Instead, they ruthlessly grabbed onto the nearest innocent bystander, desperately trying to drag someone else down to absorb their massive, catastrophic impact. They were completely willing to drown the entire surrounding world just to secure one more single, pathetic breath of air for their miserable selves today. Kendrick gasped loudly, stumbling backward against the glass wall, completely paralyzed by the terrifying realization that his future father-in-law was actively weaponizing him as a disposable human shield. He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, silently begging for salvation from the devastating trap he had blindly walked into. But I did not exhibit a single ounce of panic or fear. My heart rate remained perfectly steady. I slowly raised my left arm smoothly, adjusting my tailored jacket sleeve, and casually glanced down at the gleaming dial of my exclusive Patek Philippe wristwatch. I looked back up at Richard's sweating face and offered him a chillingly empty smile that completely froze the blood in his veins. "Is that so?" I asked, my tone dropping to a lethal, quiet frequency that commanded absolute authority. "Go ahead and try, Richard. Make the definitive phone call right now today, Richard. Let us see exactly who gets securely locked firmly behind cold iron bars right now today." Before Richard could even reach for his phone, a heavy, thunderous sound erupted from the long marble hallway outside the executive suite. The distinctive rhythmic pounding of heavy tactical boots violently shook the floorboards. The shattered oak doors were forcefully kicked open all the way, and a massive squad of heavily armed federal agents aggressively swarmed into the room. They wore dark tactical gear with the bold, bright yellow letters of the FBI and the SEC prominently displayed across their chests. They instantly fanned out, pointing their heavy weapons and completely securing the entire perimeter right now today. Richard dropped the forged document, completely stunned, as the heavily armed federal agents aggressively surrounded his mahogany table. Jonathan confidently stepped forward, opening his sleek black briefcase and extracting a highly detailed digital forensic report. He slapped the undeniable concrete evidence directly onto the glass surface right next to Richard's trembling hands. "You are not blackmailing anyone today, Richard," Jonathan stated, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority. "This comprehensive cybersecurity dossier contains the exact digital footprints, network logs, and IP addresses extracted directly from your private executive servers. We have irrefutable technological proof that neither Kendrick nor any other architect signed that toxic environmental assessment. The forensic data confirms that you and your wife Victoria intentionally used the high-resolution corporate scanner in your private office to digitally lift his signature from an unrelated innocent design contract. You deliberately superimposed his stolen signature onto the fraudulent federal forms yourself." A stern-looking senior FBI agent stepped forward, brandishing a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Richard Kensington and Victoria Kensington," the agent announced in a loud, booming voice, "you are both officially under arrest for massive federal financial fraud, severe environmental sabotage, aggravated identity theft, and complex corporate racketeering. You have the absolute right to remain completely silent. Anything you say can and will be aggressively used against you in a federal court of law." Jonathan looked down at the weeping billionaires with profound disgust. "Your pathetic attempt to frame an innocent man has only added severe obstruction of justice to your long list of federal crimes," Jonathan concluded coldly. "You are absolutely facing a miserable lifetime behind bars without any single possibility of parole. There are absolutely no legal loopholes or high-priced attorneys capable of saving your incredibly corrupt failing empire right now today." This dramatic, massive federal raid marked the incredibly humiliating and highly public conclusion of a multi-billion-dollar empire that had been built entirely upon ruthless deception and aggressive financial exploitation. The Kensington dynasty had operated for decades under the false pretense of aristocratic superiority, violently crushing small businesses and ruining countless working-class families to artificially inflate their elite status. Their untouchable golden facade was completely shattered, permanently exposing them as nothing more than sophisticated common thieves who had carelessly played a highly dangerous game of corporate roulette and had ultimately lost absolutely everything right now today. The federal agents aggressively grabbed Richard and Victoria, roughly forcing their trembling arms securely behind their backs. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly into place echoed with a beautiful, satisfying finality across the massive boardroom. Victoria wailed hysterically, her expensive designer makeup running down her pale face in thick, ugly black streaks as she was forcefully marched toward the shattered doorway. Richard violently thrashed against the strong, tactical agents, screaming incomprehensible curses and desperately pleading for mercy that simply did not exist. They were completely stripped of their dignity, wealth, and absolute power, aggressively dragged out of their own luxurious penthouse suite like common, filthy street criminals. The chaotic sounds of their pathetic screaming faded down the long hallway, leaving the once mighty, prestigious Kensington Corporation completely and utterly obliterated. Their massive, fraudulent legacy was officially erased from human existence, permanently closing the darkest chapter of their incredibly vile and highly toxic lives today without any mercy whatsoever right now. Madeline was left alone on the floor. Suddenly, a rapid succession of sharp electronic beeps erupted from her designer handbag. She scrambled to pull out her diamond-encrusted smartphone. The bright screen illuminated her tear-streaked face, displaying dozens of automated text messages from various elite banking institutions. Every single one of her exclusive platinum credit cards, offshore accounts, and emergency trust funds had been aggressively and permanently frozen. Her massive digital wealth was instantly wiped out, leaving her with absolutely zero capital. She was completely penniless and utterly helpless in a matter of mere seconds right now today. The sudden terrifying realization of her absolute financial ruin completely shattered the last remaining fragments of Madeline's fragile aristocratic pride. The incredibly arrogant woman who had openly mocked my working-class background and treated me like a repulsive disease now aggressively dropped to her bare knees on the cold glass floor. She crawled frantically across the boardroom, completely abandoning her high society dignity. She lunged forward aggressively, wrapping her trembling arms around my tailored legs and fiercely gripping the polished leather of my expensive shoes. "Please, you have to stop this," she wailed hysterically, her voice cracking with sheer, pathetic desperation. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything I said and did to you. I was completely blind and foolish. You are a brilliant, powerful man. Please do not take my money away from me. I cannot survive without my accounts. I will publicly apologize to you in front of everyone today. I will eagerly sign any restrictive legal document you put in front of me right now. Just please reactivate my offshore trust funds. I have never worked a single hard day in my entire life, and I absolutely cannot start now. You are family dad. You have to protect me from this horrible nightmare." She deliberately used the word dad, hoping to manipulate my paternal instincts. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, mascara running down her cheeks, completely desperate to secure a new source of endless funding now that her biological parents were securely heading to a maximum security federal penitentiary. It was a truly pathetic and deeply sickening display of pure, unadulterated greed, masquerading as genuine, sincere remorse in this very specific boardroom right now today. This grotesque theatrical performance perfectly exposed the incredibly disgusting hypocrisy of inherently greedy individuals when abruptly confronted with the terrifying prospect of absolute poverty. They possess absolutely no genuine moral compass or basic human loyalty. Their perceived affection is entirely transactional, securely tied to whoever holds the heaviest purse strings. The moment their opulent lifestyle is threatened, they will eagerly abandon their fierce arrogance and gladly grovel in the dirt, instantly transforming into sniveling, subservient beggars willing to completely sell their own souls just to maintain their luxurious, comfortable existence right now today without any hesitation. I did not feel a single microscopic drop of sympathy for the weeping parasite clinging desperately to my feet. I maintained a rigid, towering posture and stared down at her with eyes as cold as Arctic ice. With a sharp, aggressive, and calculated motion, I forcefully kicked my leg back completely, breaking her pathetic, desperate grip and sending her sprawling awkwardly across the boardroom floor. "You once stood in a restaurant lobby and audibly complained that my mere presence was polluting your pristine environment," I stated, my voice radiating a lethal, quiet authority. You openly mocked my faded suit, and you severely complained that my scuffed shoes were tracking filthy mud onto your precious imported rugs. Do not ever dare to touch my custom $3,000 alligator leather shoes with your incredibly toxic and deeply filthy hands ever again. You are absolutely nothing to me, Madeline. You are entirely erased. My security guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing her aggressively by the arms. Right now today, the towering security personnel forcefully hauled the screaming and kicking Madeline out of the shattered boardroom doors, dragging her relentlessly down the long marble hallway until her hysterical wails completely faded into absolute nothingness. The massive glass executive suite was suddenly incredibly quiet, leaving only the heavy, erratic breathing of my own flesh and blood. Kendrick stood completely alone amidst the total wreckage of the billionaire dynasty he had foolishly worshipped. The room was cleared of all federal agents and weeping socialites, leaving just the two of us perfectly isolated in the devastating aftermath right now today. Kendrick slowly turned his bloodshot eyes toward me. His immaculate tailored suit felt completely out of place against his heavily defeated and thoroughly crushed demeanor. He took a hesitant, staggering step forward, his legs trembling so violently he could barely support his own body weight. He closed the physical distance between us and aggressively collapsed directly onto his knees, crashing hard onto the glass floor right where Madeline had been groveling just moments prior. "Dad," he sobbed, his voice breaking into 1,000 fractured pieces. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was completely blind and monumentally stupid. I let them manipulate my mind, and I aggressively turned my back on the greatest father in the world. I allowed my toxic ambition to completely cloud my judgment. Please, Dad, you have to completely forgive me for my horrible actions. I see the truth now. I see what they really are, and I see who you really are. You saved me from federal prison today. You protected me when I absolutely did not deserve it. I promise I will never, ever disrespect you again. I will work directly by your side at Apex Holdings. We can run this massive empire together as a unified family, just like it was always meant to be. I will be the loyal, devoted son you always wanted me to be. Please, just tell me we can go back to normal and completely forget this horrible nightmare ever happened. I am ready to step up and take my rightful place by your side." He wept openly, looking up at me with desperate, swollen eyes, fully expecting a warm paternal embrace to miraculously wash away his massive, unforgivable sins in this room right now today. His tearful, desperate plea perfectly highlighted a profoundly toxic and entirely delusional mindset. Kendrick foolishly harbored the massive, arrogant illusion that after the horrific truth was violently exposed and the villains were properly punished, everything would seamlessly return to a comfortable baseline. He genuinely believed that because I possessed this massive, unimaginable wealth, he would automatically and effortlessly assume the highly coveted role of the billionaire crown prince. He falsely assumed that my unconditional paternal love would automatically grant him an unearned shortcut to supreme corporate power, effectively bypassing any real personal accountability for his profound betrayals today. I did not bend down to offer him a comforting embrace. I did not place a warm, forgiving hand upon his shaking shoulder. I simply stood incredibly still, looking down at my kneeling son from a towering, insurmountable height. My deep brown eyes held absolutely no easy forgiveness or gentle parental warmth. Instead, they radiated the absolute strictness and terrifying severity of an unyielding, merciless king, completely evaluating a highly treasonous subject. The suffocating silence stretched agonizingly between us, forcing Kendrick to slowly realize that his tearful apologies were simply not enough to instantly repair the massive structural damage he had caused. He had foolishly expected a joyful cinematic reunion, but he was rapidly discovering that actions carry incredibly heavy, permanent consequences. My massive financial empire was not a simple consolation prize for a disloyal son who only returned when his fraudulent alternatives were aggressively destroyed. The true punishment for his profound ignorance was only just beginning right now in this exact moment today. I did not reach down to wrap my arms around my crying son in some grand, melodramatic, cinematic reunion. There was no warm embrace waiting for him at the end of his treacherous journey. Instead, I deliberately took a slow, calculated step backward, putting a harsh, physical distance between my polished leather shoes and his trembling knees. The cold glass floor reflected his pathetic posture, amplifying his utter desperation. He looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, completely expecting a fatherly pardon, that I was absolutely determined never to grant him right now. You are deeply mistaken if you believe your tearful apologies will magically secure your comfortable future within my organization, Kendrick. I stated, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the boardroom like a sharpened steel blade. As the new sole owner and primary controlling entity of this entire corporate structure, my very first executive action is the immediate and permanent dissolution of the Kensington Architecture Department. Your specific division is officially terminated effectively immediately right now. Kendrick gasped loudly, clutching his chest as if he had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. But Dad, he choked out, his face turning pale. I am the lead architect. You cannot just fire me. I am your son. I stared down at him without a single ounce of pity. I am not functioning as your father in this specific professional capacity, I countered coldly. I am the absolute chief executive officer heavily restructuring a highly corrupt and completely bankrupt enterprise. You are officially unemployed as of this exact second. Furthermore, you will receive absolutely no corporate severance package or unearned financial bailouts from my private accounts. The immense credit card debt you foolishly accumulated buying imported designer bags, luxury sports cars, and ridiculously expensive diamond jewelry for that vicious, racist woman is now entirely your own personal burden to carry. You eagerly financed her opulent lifestyle to buy your way into their toxic family, and you will now face the crushing weight of those aggressive financial liabilities completely alone. You are totally stripped of your prestigious corporate title, your lucrative monthly salary, and your false aristocratic identity. You have absolutely nothing left but the expensive tailored suit you are currently wearing right now in this incredibly lonely, miserable boardroom, standing right here, entirely alone right now today. True paternal love does not involve mindlessly shielding a grown man from the devastating consequences of his own terribly selfish actions. I firmly believe that constantly rescuing Kendrick from his profound mistakes would only permanently stunt his crucial personal growth. He needed to physically taste the incredibly bitter and highly toxic fruit he had so eagerly planted. Allowing him to aggressively hit absolute rock bottom was the only viable method left to completely destroy his massive, arrogant ego and forcefully rebuild his completely shattered moral compass from the very ground up right now today, without any mercy perfectly. Kendrick remained kneeling on the floor, his physical body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors as the sheer gravity of my ultimate decree finally penetrated his highly delusional mind. He was completely trapped in a severe state of profound cognitive shock, entirely unable to fully process the catastrophic reality of his sudden, absolute bankruptcy. The glorious golden safety net he had completely taken for granted had been aggressively and permanently severed, leaving him plunging rapidly into a dark, terrifying financial abyss. He frantically realized he had absolutely no recurring income remaining to service his incredibly massive debts and zero liquid assets to his disgraced name. The elite luxury apartment he rented, the imported vehicles he leased, and the high society image he desperately worshipped were all instantaneously vaporized into thin air. He was suddenly completely exposed and entirely vulnerable, entirely stripped of every single superficial resource he relied upon. Horrific, agonizing panic fiercely gripped his tight chest, suffocating him relentlessly in this completely isolated room. Kendrick aggressively grabbed the sharply creased fabric of my tailored suit pants, his tears flowing freely and continuously down his terribly exhausted face. "Please, Dad," he wailed loudly, his voice cracking under the intense, unbearable pressure of his imminent, massive ruin. "I cannot possibly survive this kind of heavy, crushing debt completely alone. The predatory credit companies will completely destroy my entire life, instantly. I am furiously begging you to just aggressively pay off this specific balance for me, one single final time today. I solemnly promise I will perfectly repay every single cent to you somehow eventually." I firmly pulled my leg back effortlessly, breaking his desperate, weak grip entirely. I looked down at him with an expression of pure, unyielding resolve, refusing to offer him any easy, pathetic escape route. Absolute ignorance and extreme foolishness must always be paid for with your own personal blood and agonizing sweat. "Kendrick," I declared, my voice booming with a heavy, unforgiving authority across the empty boardroom. "You aggressively chose to entirely sell out your own family, your rich heritage, and your deep personal integrity just to desperately chase after meaningless, shallow vanity. You willfully turned a blind eye to massive federal crimes simply because you were completely terrified of losing a fraudulent aristocratic status that never truly belonged to you in the first place. My immense, hard-earned wealth is absolutely not a convenient magic wand designed to instantly erase the severe, catastrophic consequences of your incredibly selfish and profoundly foolish actions. I will not casually write a massive check to aggressively rescue you from a terrifying monster that you actively fed and nurtured yourself. You must now face the terrifying collection agencies, the aggressive repossession officers, and the deep public humiliation completely on your own merit. You desperately wanted to effortlessly live like a wealthy, powerful elite. So now, you must fully learn how to survive the brutal, freezing winter of total, absolute poverty. Do not dare to contact my private corporate offices or ever beg for my vast financial assistance again. Whenever you finally manage to learn exactly how to be a highly responsible, self-sufficient, and truly honorable man, standing firmly on your own 2 feet. We will successfully have a real conversation about your future right now today, in this incredibly quiet room right here forever right now, finally indeed thoroughly today. Nearly 50 long years ago, I arrived in this harsh, unforgiving city with absolutely nothing but the deeply frayed shirt on my aching back and a fiercely burning determination in my tough, resilient heart. I aggressively fought tooth and nail against severe, systematic poverty, violent prejudice, and overwhelming, seemingly impossible odds to meticulously construct my massive global empire completely from scratch. I desperately needed Kendrick to directly inherit that exact same fierce internal fortitude and relentless survival instinct to ensure he could successfully weather any massive catastrophic storm that life inevitably threw his way right now today, perfectly. I sharply turned my broad back on my weeping son, entirely severing our direct physical connection without displaying a single ounce of lingering hesitation. Jonathan and my heavily armed private security personnel immediately formed a tight protective formation, seamlessly escorting me toward the shattered exit of the massive boardroom. My polished alligator leather shoes tapped rhythmically against the pristine glass floor, loudly echoing a stark, definitive finality that completely suffocated the tense atmosphere. We aggressively stepped out into the long, expansive marble hallway, completely ignoring the surrounding corporate chaos that we had violently unleashed upon the entire corrupt building. The heavy broken oak double doors slowly swung completely shut behind us, firmly sealing Kendrick entirely alone inside the terrifying, devastating wreckage of his completely shattered elite illusions. He was left aggressively kneeling amidst the sharp broken glass of a totally ruined billionaire. Dynasty completely abandoned by his wealthy, deceitful fiancée's family and fiercely rejected by the incredibly powerful father he had so foolishly betrayed today. The very next morning, every major national news network across the United States aggressively broadcasted the monumental, catastrophic collapse of the once mighty Kensington Group across their bright, flashing screens. Prominent financial anchors spoke in hushed, shocked tones as they completely detailed the sudden, unprecedented federal raid that violently brought down the untouchable billionaire dynasty overnight. Bold red news tickers scrolled endlessly across the bottom of the screens, announcing the immediate total liquidation of their massive real estate portfolio and the freezing of all their personal assets, bringing their elite reign to a sudden, devastating halt right now today. Exactly 3 months after the dramatic federal raid inside that shattered glass boardroom, the highly publicized criminal trial of Richard and Victoria Kensington officially reached its inevitable, brutal conclusion inside a packed federal courthouse. The aggressive prosecuting attorneys presented an absolutely overwhelming mountain of concrete, undeniable digital evidence meticulously compiled by my elite financial operatives and federal investigators. They methodically laid out the massive, intricate web of severe corporate racketeering, environmental sabotage, aggravated identity theft, and complex international money laundering schemes the couple had utilized to artificially inflate their crumbling empire for over a decade. Richard sat slouched at the defense table, his face completely devoid of its former supreme arrogant confidence, violently trembling as the stern federal judge firmly slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block. The judge delivered a blistering, deeply condemning speech, detailing their profound lack of basic human morality and their vicious predatory business practices that actively targeted vulnerable working-class communities to steal their hard-earned assets. The final verdict was absolutely crushing and entirely merciless, leaving no room for any high-priced legal appeals or corrupt political interventions. Richard and Victoria Kensington were both formally convicted on all 75 federal felony charges and officially sentenced to serve 20 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary completely without the possibility of parole. They were aggressively denied bail and ordered to instantly begin serving their lengthy, brutal sentences right away. Their high society friends immediately completely abandoned them, entirely, erasing their names from every single exclusive country club roster and elite charity board across the entire eastern seaboard, leaving them absolutely isolated, broken, and utterly defenseless against the strict, harsh realities of the terrifying federal criminal justice system right now in this very specific, isolated, lonely moment today. This massive, highly public judicial punishment was the exact perfect retribution for incredibly greedy individuals who had spent their entire privileged lives recklessly using their inherited financial power to violently crush poor, struggling families beneath their polished designer shoes. They possessed a sickening, fundamental belief that their exorbitant wealth effectively placed them completely above the basic laws of human decency and ordinary societal rules. They ruthlessly destroyed countless innocent lives to maintain their fake, glamorous facade, never once pausing to consider the devastating collateral damage their extreme, selfish actions caused to the vulnerable working-class communities around them. The massive, heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse swung wide open, revealing a chaotic, aggressive sea of flashing camera lights and shouting investigative journalists eagerly waiting outside. Richard and Victoria Kensington were forcefully marched down the concrete front steps, no longer wearing their custom-tailored Italian suits and expensive designer dresses. They were now humiliatingly dressed in bright, highly visible orange prison jumpsuits, their hands and ankles firmly secured with thick, heavy steel chains clinking loudly with every single defeated step they took. The incredibly wealthy billionaires desperately tried to hide their pale, crying faces from the aggressive media cameras, but the ruthless reporters aggressively mocked their spectacular downfall, shouting pointed questions about their profound, absolute ruin. They were forcefully shoved into the back of a heavily armored, dark federal transport van, completely stripped of their dignity, identity, and unearned power, permanently trading their lavish penthouse suite for a tiny, cold concrete prison cell for the rest of their miserable natural lives right now. Exactly 4 months later, I was sitting quietly in my underground command center reviewing global financial acquisition reports when a highly encrypted message arrived from my private security detail. The notification contained a single high-resolution photograph taken discreetly from inside a remarkably cheap, incredibly run-down suburban diner located entirely on the miserable, poverty-stricken outskirts of the city. The digital image captured a stark, depressing reality that perfectly illustrated the ultimate devastating consequences of absolute, unadulterated greed and profound moral bankruptcy, violently colliding with the harsh, unforgiving real world, leaving absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated misery. Today, I expanded the digital photograph on my massive central monitor to closely examine the highly depressing scene completely unfolding inside the incredibly filthy, greasy roadside diner. There, standing rigidly near a completely overflowing garbage can, was Madeline Kensington, entirely stripped of her former glorious high society, aristocratic glamour, and profound extreme arrogance. She was wearing a highly unflattering, aggressively stained brown polyester waitress uniform, completely covered in dark grease spots and dried, cheap ketchup stains. Her once perfectly manicured soft hands were now heavily calloused, dry, and aggressively wrapped in cheap white medical tape from washing harsh chemical dishes for minimum wage. Her shiny, expensive designer makeup was entirely gone, permanently replaced by deep, dark, exhausted bags under her red, severely bloodshot eyes. She was aggressively sweeping up a massive pile of shattered cheap ceramic plates she had carelessly dropped onto the sticky linoleum floor. Standing directly over her was a large, deeply sweating, aggressive diner manager furiously pointing a thick, greasy finger directly in her pale, terrified face. He was loudly and violently berating her for her sheer incompetence, aggressively screaming that the cost of the broken dishes would be immediately violently deducted from her already incredibly pathetic weekly paycheck, completely destroying any small, fragile hope she had of surviving the upcoming harsh winter season without severely starving. Completely, entirely alone. The former billionaire heiress who had once fiercely complained that my worn leather shoes were tracking filthy mud onto her imported expensive rugs, was now aggressively sobbing openly in public, completely humiliated, desperately begging a fast food manager not to fire her because she absolutely needed the meager cash to successfully pay her overdue monthly rent for a tiny rat-infested studio apartment right now in this exact specific, incredibly desperate and completely helpless moment. This horrific physical and emotional degradation was the most beautiful, perfectly balanced display of instant karmic justice I had ever witnessed in my entire long life. Madeline had actively spent her entire privileged existence violently looking down upon the working class, completely treating poor struggling individuals like highly repulsive invisible insects, entirely unworthy of basic human compassion. She had maliciously weaponized her inherited wealth to cruelly manipulate and fiercely destroy anyone who stood in her way, completely failing to realize that her profound, disgusting arrogance would eventually forcefully drag her down into the exact same miserable, impoverished hell. I sat comfortably in my expensive leather chair, quietly staring at the incredibly pathetic image of the crying, completely broken woman on my glowing computer screen. I did not feel a single microscopic ounce of basic human sympathy or lingering pity for her severe aggressive suffering. She was simply forcefully reaping the exact highly toxic harvest she had so eagerly and maliciously planted throughout her entire miserable, empty life. With a slow, highly deliberate, and incredibly calm motion, I firmly pressed the delete key on my secure encrypted keyboard, instantly wiping the digital photograph completely from my private servers forever. I casually closed the heavy lid of my expensive metallic laptop, decisively and permanently, erasing the entire disgraced Kensington family from my active memory and my ongoing life. They were now absolutely nothing more than a highly insignificant speck of dust violently swept away by the massive, unstoppable forces of my incredibly powerful, overarching financial empire right now in this quiet room today, perfectly, forever. Exactly 6 months passed since the dramatic total collapse of the Kensington Empire. High above the scorching city pavement, the merciless summer sun beat down, aggressively raising the temperature to a blistering 104 degrees. Kendrick stood amidst the deafening roar of heavy machinery entirely covered in a thick layer of suffocating gray cement. Dust and heavy sweat. He wore heavily stained protective gear, adjusting his hard hat as he hoisted an incredibly heavy 90-pound bag of concrete onto his violently aching shoulder, struggling under the intense, crushing weight on the busy, noisy construction site today. No more luxury imported sports cars, and absolutely no more sprawling penthouse suites. Kendrick had aggressively stripped his life down to the barest minimum required for human survival. He currently rented a tiny windowless room in a dangerous, dilapidated slum on the absolute worst side of the city, dedicating every single waking hour to performing brutal manual labor just to aggressively pay down the massive, insurmountable credit card debt he owed. As the loud noon whistle blared across the active site, signaling a brief lunch break, a group of rough, heavily tattooed construction workers approached him, wiping sweat from their brows. "Hey, Kendrick!" one of the older foremen shouted, clapping him roughly on the back. "A few of us are heading down to the local dive bar to throw back some cold beers and place a few bets on the afternoon horse races. You have been working like a demon all week long. Why do you not come along and blow off some steam with us today?" Kendrick gently lowered a massive wooden beam to the ground and wiped his gritty forehead with a completely dirty rag. "I appreciate the offer, gentlemen," he replied, his voice remarkably steady and completely devoid of any former aristocratic arrogance. "But I have to respectfully decline your invitation. Every single dollar I earn on this site has a specific dedicated purpose, and I absolutely cannot afford to waste a single dime on cheap liquor right now." The foreman let out a loud, booming laugh, shaking his head in mild amusement. "Suit yourself, kid," the man chuckled. "You are definitely the most stubbornly disciplined worker I have ever seen on these tough, brutal sites." Kendrick simply offered a polite, tired smile, turning his full attention back to his physical labor. Instantly today, the highly toxic and completely delusional upper-class shell that previously encased his entire personality had been violently and thoroughly stripped away. Without the blinding artificial allure of unearned wealth and fraudulent prestige clouding his judgment, the core foundation of his true character was finally revealed. Kendrick was returning to his absolute, most fundamental, authentic self. He had successfully reclaimed the deeply ingrained honesty, unwavering resilience, and genuine fierce will to survive that he originally inherited from his hardworking father, completely transforming into a truly honorable man who understood the profound inherent value of pure, intense labor today. The remarkably delicate and unblemished hands that had once elegantly gripped incredibly expensive architectural drawing pens, drafting billion-dollar luxury penthouses, were now permanently stained. They were currently heavily calloused, deeply blistered, and actively bleeding from handling raw, rough cement blocks for 10 grueling hours every single day. The sheer physical agony radiating through his heavily exhausted muscles was absolutely overwhelming, fiercely burning his entire upper body. Yet Kendrick aggressively gritted his teeth and silently endured the immense, excruciating pain without ever uttering a single solitary word of complaint to anyone. He forcefully pushed through the massive, suffocating heat, refusing to take any unauthorized breaks or display any momentary signs of structural weakness. He knew with absolute, unquestionable certainty that this incredibly brutal manual labor was the exact necessary punishment required to properly cleanse his highly corrupted soul, permanently paying the heavy ultimate price for his former arrogant ignorance. He hoisted another massive concrete bag, stepping boldly forward into the blazing light. Today. Perfectly now. Exactly 100 meters away from the active, deafening construction site, a highly battered and severely rusted old Chevrolet pickup truck was parked quietly, entirely hidden beneath the thick, dark shade of a massive, towering oak tree. The heavily dented vehicle completely blended into the impoverished surroundings, appearing exactly like any other broken-down working-class automobile. However, sitting silently inside the suffocatingly hot, unventilated cabin was not an ordinary struggling laborer. I remained perfectly still, hiding securely behind the dark, heavily tinted glass windows, keeping a strictly covert observation over the entire dusty perimeter. Right now today, I sat completely motionless in the driver's seat, my aging eyes sharply focused on observing every single minute gesture my exhausted son made from across the vast distance. I had secretly monitored him for the past 6 consecutive months, silently tracking his brutal daily routine without ever once revealing my powerful presence. He had absolutely no idea that the incredibly wealthy billionaire he had previously begged for immediate financial salvation was currently sitting in a rusted truck merely a block away, watching his profound, painful transformation closely. Through the lens of my tactical binoculars, I suddenly noticed a very old, frail construction worker suddenly collapse onto a stack of wooden pallets, clutching his stomach in obvious severe pain. The blistering midday heat had completely overwhelmed the elderly man, leaving him dangerously dizzy and severely dehydrated. While the other rough laborers callously ignored the sick man and continued aggressively walking toward the loud dive bar, Kendrick immediately dropped his heavy equipment and sprinted rapidly across the dusty concrete slab. I watched intensely as my son carefully helped the older man sit upright, retrieving a clean bottle of cold water from his own personal cooler. Kendrick then reached into his dirty canvas bag and pulled out the single modest sandwich he had meticulously prepared for his own lunch. Without a single moment of hesitation or any calculated selfish reluctance, he gently placed his entire meal directly into the trembling hands of the sick elderly worker, sacrificing his own necessary sustenance completely. Kendrick sat patiently beside the old man, gently patting his stooped back and aggressively shielding him from the harsh burning sunlight, using his own broad shoulders, ensuring the stranger was entirely safe and fully recovered in that very specific, highly emotional moment right now, today, absolutely and perfectly. My profound, unconditional love for my only son had absolutely never extinguished or faded away, despite the incredibly harsh and violent manner in which I had completely banished him from my corporate presence. My intense, seemingly cruel rejection was merely a necessary protective shadow deliberately designed to forcefully burn away his toxic, blinding arrogance. I had patiently waited in absolute silence, actively hoping and deeply praying for the exact, specific moment his frozen heart would finally thaw. His dormant, inherent compassion had successfully awakened, proving that my extreme parenting methods had truly worked perfectly today. Right now, indeed. As I silently watched him gently offer his very last piece of fresh bread to a completely helpless stranger, A sudden overwhelming wave of pure, profound emotion fiercely crashed directly into my solid chest. A single warm tear slowly broke free from my stern, rigid eye, cascading silently down my deeply wrinkled cheek to quietly splash against the dark, heavy fabric of my expensive tailored suit. It was the very first tear I had allowed myself to shed in many long, grueling years. This solitary tear was absolutely not born from any lingering sadness, agonizing regret, or heavy, lingering disappointment. It was a beautiful, powerful tear of immense, unadulterated paternal pride. My foolish, misguided boy was completely gone, entirely erased by the harsh, burning fires of absolute manual labor and severe economic devastation. In his place, a truly honorable, selfless, and profoundly resilient man had successfully emerged from the dark, bitter ashes. My beloved son had finally grown up correctly and perfectly today, right now. The warm, golden hues of the late afternoon sunset slowly descended upon my old, familiar brick house, casting long, peaceful shadows across the quiet suburban street, right here today. I sat silently on the weathered stone bench, resting on my front porch, enjoying the very cool, fresh evening breeze. Suddenly, the loud rattling, sputtering engine of a severely rusted, beat-up pickup truck broke the tranquil silence. The heavy vehicle coughed and squealed loudly as it pulled up and parked directly in front of my cracked driveway, stopping completely under the large oak tree right now, perfectly indeed. The heavy metal door of the rusted truck creaked open, and Kendrick stepped out onto the pavement. He was wearing heavily stained work boots and a faded canvas jacket completely covered in thick layers of dried mud and gray cement dust. The pristine, tailored Italian suits and the expensive imported cologne were entirely gone. The fierce, blinding arrogance that had previously dictated his every single movement had been completely washed away by months of intense, grueling labor. He did not strut with the fake manufactured confidence of a high society elite. Instead, he walked up my driveway with the slow, measured, and incredibly grounded steps of a truly mature man who understood the profound, heavy weight of genuine hard work. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking directly up at me. His face was visibly exhausted, marked by deep lines of extreme physical fatigue and severe economic struggle. Yet his brown eyes were remarkably clear and incredibly calm, completely devoid of the chaotic, desperate illusions that had previously blinded him. There was no lingering entitlement and absolutely no toxic resentment hiding behind his steady gaze. He was not looking at the incredibly wealthy billionaire CEO who had violently stripped away his entire luxurious lifestyle. He was simply looking at his father with a profound level of deep, respectful understanding. He stood incredibly tall, carrying the undeniable, quiet dignity of a man who had successfully survived total destruction and rebuilt his own shattered soul from the very ground up. We stared at each other in absolute silence, allowing the heavy, humid air to absorb the immense weight of our shared, complicated history, without uttering a single unnecessary word right now, today, in this specific moment, entirely, perfectly, completely indeed, right now, correctly here today. This exact same modest brick house was once the very source of his deepest, profound shame. It was the humble working-class origin he had desperately tried to permanently erase from his manufactured upper-class identity. He used to aggressively avoid driving his luxury sports cars down this simple street, fearing his wealthy elite friends might discover his true roots. But now, after experiencing the horrific, toxic betrayal of that fake, glamorous world, this quiet, unpretentious home was the absolute only safe haven his tired soul genuinely longed to return to today, right now, completely, perfectly, forever, indeed. I slowly stood up from the weathered stone bench, my tall, imposing frame casting a long, protective shadow across the wooden porch. I did not immediately reach out to him or offer any comforting paternal greeting. I kept my posture completely rigid and my expression entirely unreadable. My dark eyes locked fiercely onto his exhausted face, silently waiting to see exactly what he would do next. The heavy, stifling tension between us thickened aggressively, building up to the absolute ultimate breaking point. This was the ultimate definitive test of his entire transformative journey. Would he break down and beg for an unearned financial rescue, or would he finally stand his ground like a proper man? The heavy crickets chirped loudly in the fading evening light, amplifying the intense, suffocating pressure of this highly anticipated confrontation. Every single second stretched into an absolute eternity as I waited patiently for my son to make his final defining move right now today. Perfectly, indeed, completely beautifully here. Kendrick did not flinch under my intense, heavy gaze. He simply let out a long, tired breath and reached into a wrinkled plastic grocery bag he was holding in his calloused, blistered hand. He slowly pulled out 2 incredibly cheap standard cans of domestic beer. Without asking for any formal permission, he walked up the short concrete pathway and heavily slumped down onto the bottom wooden step of my front porch. He sat comfortably right next to my polished leather shoes, completely unbothered by his own dirt or my towering silent presence right now today, exactly perfectly indeed. He cracked open the first aluminum can with a sharp, loud pop and extended his deeply scarred, bruised hand, offering the cold, cheap beverage directly to me. I looked down at the simple domestic beer and then back at his completely exhausted face. "Dad." He began, his voice carrying a profound, genuine sincerity that struck me straight in the heart. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was an absolute fool, and I deeply disrespected everything you ever taught me. I was completely blinded by superficial garbage, and I actively betrayed the only real family I ever had." He did not follow his apology with a desperate plea for a financial bailout. He did not complain about his grueling minimum wage job, the massive crippling debts, or the severe physical agony he currently endured every single day on the hot construction site. He fully owned his massive, catastrophic mistakes, accepting absolute total responsibility for his own ruined life, without any pathetic excuses. "This cheap beer is certainly not as incredibly expensive or glamorous as that vintage imported champagne they poured at Ciel," he said, offering a small, genuine smile that reached his tired eyes. "But I bought this simple drink completely with my own hard-earned overtime pay today. Every single cent came directly from my own blood and sweat." He held the cold aluminum can up a little higher, offering a true olive branch built on deep, undeniable mutual respect. "Will you sit down and drink this with me, Dad?" He asked the simple, humble question, completely sealing his entire magnificent transformation perfectly right now today, in this incredibly quiet, peaceful, beautiful evening, as the sun finally set over our shared horizon, creating a perfect, beautiful, timeless memory forever. Indeed, right here, perfectly, entirely today. Looking into his honest eyes, my mind instantly flashed back 32 years to the incredibly terrifying, glorious morning he was born. Holding his tiny, fragile body in my large, rough hands, I had sworn a sacred, unbreakable oath to his late mother. I promised I would raise him to become a truly honorable, decent, and profoundly strong black man who could proudly stand on his own 2 feet. Through all the intense, brutal suffering and severe heartbreak, that sacred, solemn oath was finally completely, beautifully fulfilled right now today, in this very exact moment, perfectly, forever indeed. I slowly sat down on the wooden steps right beside my dirty, exhausted son, bringing our shoulders close together. I reached out and firmly accepted the cheap aluminum can from his heavily calloused working hands. I raised my drink and lightly clinked it against his, producing a soft, satisfying metallic chime that perfectly echoed into the quiet suburban night. I took a long, slow sip of the inexpensive cold liquid, letting it wash down my throat. "It tastes absolutely delicious, son," I said, my deep voice incredibly warm and entirely full of immense, unconditional love. A bright, radiant smile of pure, genuine reconciliation simultaneously broke across both of our faces, completely erasing all the dark, bitter pain of the past year. The massive, invisible financial empire generating $200,000 every single month was still securely waiting in the shadows. But this time, it had finally found a truly worthy, honorable heir. The brutal, completely flawless lesson was officially over perfectly today, indeed. Reflecting on this entire journey, I realized a profound truth about the nature of real wealth. True prosperity is never measured by the balance in your offshore bank accounts or the expensive designer labels stitched inside your tailored suits. It is measured entirely by the unbreakable strength of your personal character and your fierce resilience when everything you rely on is violently stripped away. Money can easily buy a beautiful, convincing illusion, but it can never purchase genuine loyalty or basic human integrity. We must build our lives on a solid foundation of respect and honest hard work, because those are the only true assets that can never be seized or destroyed by anyone today. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to the channel for more powerful lessons on life and family.